All right. All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. I want to welcome you to our learning community this morning, and glad that you all could make it. For those of you who, how many of you have, this is your first time to one of our strategies learning community events? All right, yeah, thank you, that's great. So just so you know, a little bit different, we have partners in Merced County and Fresno County that are watching us remotely. So they're at their own site and they're gonna be listening in, and as Jen speaks later, and they're gonna be doing the same activities and things that we're doing, but they're doing them remotely at their own site. So we have Shane and Carrie up here, who I refer to as our technology divas, and they're going to be helping to keep everybody connected. And so just a little FYI, and then when we get to the point later on in the afternoon where we will have question and answer time with Jen, we have a microphone that will be passing around folks so that they can hear you, and vice versa, we'll do the same. So we'll have some cross interaction with our partners in other areas of the county. All right, so thank you. All right, and I have want to introduce myself. I'm Lori Schumacher. I actually am a program director at Center for Human Services in Stanislaus County. We're a private nonprofit agency, and Jen Rangel over there, wave Jen, is my co-facilitator, and Jen also works at the center. So we work with family resource centers and family strengthening programs at our agency. But on behalf of Strategies 2.0, we're facilitators for the Valley Learning Community. So we're connected to their team, and Shane and Carrie are from Strategies 2.0. Some of our other partners this morning, we've got Comprehensive Youth Services in Fresno, so they're the folks in Fresno County. We've got Monica and her crew in Merced County at the Office of Education. And a big thanks again to Kathy and the County Office of Ed here for letting us be in this fantastic space. We really appreciate it. And we also have folks that are joining us online. So just an FYI for the future, if there's anything you're interested in, you can always sit in on a learning community online if you can't be there in person. So we have folks online. Our funder, we definitely want to offer some appreciation to the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, otherwise known as OHCAP for short. They are the funders, and they make this available to all of you at no cost, which is always a bonus. A little bit about Strategies. The Strategies mission really is to take resources out into the field to support professionals, and you can see our hope is really to be a catalyst for professional skills, organizational structure, and building community relationships necessary to mitigate the risk factors for child abuse and neglect, and importantly, to promote child, family, and community well-being. And Strategies is actually a partnership of 3 agencies. One is the CAP Center, or the Child Abuse Prevention Center in Sacramento. The other is the Children's Bureau in Orange County, where Shane and Carrie actually work, and then San Diego State University. And our goal really for Strategies 2.0 and all the work that we do is to grow knowledge and networks for professionals who are working with families, and that's who all you are. All right, so in terms of Strategies, there are lots of ways to participate and really to support your professional growth. So far, you all successfully registered, so you were able to get online, register for this learning community event. But Strategies also offers trainings and webinars as well. So anytime you want to, you can go to the website and you can see what's available for you. And there's a lot of really excellent trainings that Shane and Carrie and other partners provide actually throughout the state. There's also webinars that you can take advantage of. These learning community convenings, we do these 4 times a year. This is the first time we've been in San Joaquin County. Typically we've been in Stanislaus County and Modesto, but we're trying to move around a little bit just so we can create access for folks in different spaces. And then if you go to the Strategies website, you can see our resources page. There's lots of material. There's things online that you can download and utilize in your work. And then finally, Strategies has a YouTube channel. So a lot of our learning communities, webinars, trainings are loaded on the YouTube channel. So you can pull that up and take a look at that at your leisure at your own desk. Okay, a little bit about learning communities, because this is really different than a training. Sometimes trainings are very specific, they're one topic, they're just focused on the day, and you come and you hear great stuff and you go away. So learning communities, you're gonna hear some great stuff, true, but what we're really hoping to do is get people connected in different sectors and begin to learn about best practices in the field that we can take away with us, that we can promote and use with our partners. So, so we have some ongoing dialogue about what we're learning and the work and how it's being influenced by our learning as a result. So that's also why we have folks in Merced and in Fresno counties. We're all kind of learning this in our Valley region together. And we're really hoping that that will continue to promote good practice in the field. So we'll have some more conversations about that today. Just a little bit about, you know, our group agreements for the day. We want to start and end on time. We're hoping to break for lunch at 11:30 and give you an hour for that. And how great is it, at least here at this site, there's a deli right next door, so that's bonus. We're encourage participation and engagement here, and we're going to give you opportunity for that today. We just ask that you limit conversations that you have, especially while Jen is speaking, and I guarantee you won't want to miss a minute of that. And then obviously we hope everyone will silence their cell phones, turn them off, whatever is easiest, so that doesn't interrupt you or anyone around you. And practice self-care, take a break as you need it. We have snacks and treats over there. As Kathy said, the bathrooms are right outside the door, so do take care of yourself. You lost Merced. Oh, okay. This is an example of occasional technical difficulties that come up. So Shane and Carrie will be monitoring that. In the meantime, we'll tell you a little bit about our learning community goals. Last year, we spent a lot of time focusing on the family strengthening framework and the 5 protective factors. So everything that we did was connected to a protective factor. And you know, our goal was really to begin to get people to look at some of the work they're doing through the lens of different protective factors. So this year, we decided to take that a little further and build on it and really listen to what people were interested based on what they learned last year. So we want to continue to build on learning that's related to the protective factors. And really what we're focusing on today is resiliency for children and parents who have been impacted by trauma. And Jen is going to help us out with that. Our second goal is really to deepen the understanding of best practice and core practice across the field, and to highlight some really great things that are working, because we know that you all are doing some great work out there, and we're just really anxious to hear about it and share that out. Sometimes in the field, people you know, are doing things that they don't necessarily share. And we really want to encourage sharing and learning from each other. And then finally, we're really hoping that people walk away with some tangible stuff today. So things that you can identify that you're going to take back and practice and try. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, maybe it's going to take some practice, but we're really hoping that you walk away with some things that you're going to be able to use. So those are our goals. We're hoping we hit those today. A little bit about today. We've invited Jen back because we had tremendous response to her presentation and our learning time that we had last May when she was here with us. And we really began to explore the impact of toxic stress on children. And so we're going to review some basics around toxic stress and trauma pathways with Jen. What we're really hoping is that we can learn some resiliency practices so that you can walk away. So when you're working with children and families, that you've got some tools to help promote resiliency in these families who have been impacted by trauma. As I said before, we want you to walk away with some hands-on things that you can use right away in the work that you do. And finally, we're hoping that you can connect with other partners in your region or in other regions or agencies maybe you haven't connected with or you don't see very often. This is an opportunity to create some networking, so hope that will happen today. All right, so if you like taking photos, posting to social media, we do that in strategies. We like to share out, some of the activity and the good work that's happening. If you do that, hashtag ValleyLC, hashtag Build Resilience. We'll post some of those today. And our agenda is very basic. We're going to do a little warm-up activity here in just a few minutes. I'm going to invite Jen up. Then we'll have Jennifer Johnson join us, and she'll do her presentation. We'll take a break for lunch, 11:30, and then after lunch, we're going to have some time for question and answers for Jen to respond to, and then we're going to have some focused conversations and discussion about what you heard and what you can move forward with. All right. All right, so I am going to turn this off. So we have two Jens. This is our Jen, Jennifer Rangel. And then Jen's going to lead us in a little activity here.
Are they on? They're still. Okay. So if I could have everyone here stand up and find a partner not at your table. So once you have a partner, does everyone have a partner? Lori? Oh, do you have a partner? She has a partner. Does everybody have a partner? So once you have a partner, go ahead and introduce yourself and where you work and maybe a little bit about what you do there. And the question is, how do you keep from getting overwhelmed? Okay, and after that, if you attended our last learning community, we had a panel talk about father involvement. So the second question is, if you were at the last learning community, did you try anything that you heard or learned from the panel?
Go ahead and find somebody in the room that you don't know,
or if you didn't attend,
you
can talk about maybe any father programs or how at your agency you promote father involvement. Okay?
And
so we'll give you a couple minutes to do that.
If you attended, so how do you keep from getting overwhelmed? And then if you were at the last learning community, what did you hear that was interesting to you, or what did you learn, or what is something that you tried since that last meeting? Thank you. And online participants, please feel free to answer those questions in the chat box and we can read them out for you. Thank you.
Welcome back, Monica. I hope you can see the questions up on the screen. Have people partner up with somebody, share their name and agency. Question number 1, how do you keep from getting overwhelmed? And question number 2, if you were at the last Valley Learning Community, which was on father involvement, did you try anything that you heard or learn in your program or agencies? So just kind of share with people, online people. Oh, good, I've got one response online. So thank you so much. We encourage our online participants that are not in a group of people to go ahead and type their answers into the chat box. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So we have about 16 online.
Oh.
The per county group, I think we had, I don't remember how many there were on that list. Only like 16 or 18 people, so it sounds like a lot. They got my email and they understood. That was cool.
Okay. Yes. So I'm hoping you got to meet someone new. Yes. I have, it is on. Yeah. Can you hear me? I'm hoping you all had some great conversations this morning to get you started. This is always the most difficult to get everyone, now that everyone's chatty. All right. So I'm hoping you got to meet someone new and learn about something. Is there anyone here at this site that was at our last learning community and maybe tried something that they heard or they learned about father involvement last time? It's okay. Is there anyone that would like to share about what they do at their agency to involve or engage dads? It's okay. All right. So we will go to our other, you guys can all go back to your seats. We will go to our other sites.
Angelita, do you have anything to share? But I see that you are self-muted, so you're going to have to unmute yourself if you're going to talk.
Checking things. Yeah.
How about Monica? I've unmuted. Monica, you haven't called in. I can't unmute you unless you call in. So, all right, so we're going to move on.
Just so a lot of you know, in October, we had a panel of 3 super engaging gentlemen that do father engagement work. We had Justin Margolis, who actually is in Butte County and does a lot of programming for families and specifically dads there, and Lamar Henderson from All Dads Matter in Merced County, who does amazing work in Merced County. And then we had Paul, I'm forgetting his last name, but from Tulare County. Say that? Paul Prado from Tulare County. And so we had a really great panel discussion, and they gave us some really great ideas about ways to engage dads, because a lot of us in the work that we do, it's easy to engage moms. Moms come sort of flocking in because they love connection. Dads, not so much. It takes a little different strategy to really to get them connected. So anyway, we will provide more information about that by way of a newsletter that we're going to send out. So if you are on our mailing list, you will get that. All right. Wow, we really want to welcome back Jen. As I said before, we had Jen with us in May to begin to help us understand what children and families experience who've been impacted by trauma of all kinds. And for those of you that have not met Jen before, I just want to share a little bit of information about her. Jen is a licensed LCSW, and she's a mental health therapist. She currently provides clinical trainings and consultation for our Stanislaus County Behavioral Health and Recovery Services Department. And Jen is also a teacher. So Jen teaches in the Master of Social Work program at CSU Stanislaus, and she's been there for the last 13 years, Jen? 13, 14 years? 14. And for the last 7 years, she's been the coordinator of the Peer Project at CSU Stanislaus. And their goal is to create prevention and education related activities to eliminate stigma associated with mental health, as well as reduce the risk of student suicide. Jen is engaged in a lot of other programs and consultation. And I said this before when we announced that she was going to be joining us the first time, and then also again this time. I've mentioned her name in various meetings and activities that I was sharing out with, and the response I got every single time was, "Oh my gosh, she's so great. We love her. She's awesome." And trauma is a difficult subject to have conversation about and kind of dive into, and so we really appreciate Jen's approach and her style and her presence with us this morning. So with that, I'm going to welcome her up here, and we're going to get started. All right. Thank you, Jen.
Pressure's on.
You guys can clap if you want, just in case. Sorry, you have to reattach yourself.
Nope.
Monica, I don't know if you saw that, but Monica put her hand on the screen.
Yes, please. All right, and may I have my slides? Good morning. Wow, a lot of pressure, right, with that intro. I assure you that's not the same shirt. That one's white, this one's yellow. That was from last time. All right. Not that I would be opposed to wearing the same shirt from last time. Slides, or shall I just click? All right. All right, so in regards to trauma-informed practices, this beginning slide is really to let us all know that as service providers, the things that we do, the things that we say, the way that we engage, the activities that we embark on with our clients, they actually affect the brain. And so this is really the beginning slide to hopefully symbolize this, right? Everything that we do, again, the way we engage, the way we work with the client, the way that we speak to families, all of that, we can affect a brain that has been affected through trauma. We have to remind ourselves of that over and over again, and here's why. Working with families that have been affected by trauma is hard. Many times we find ourselves repeating. Many times we find ourselves being set all the way back to ground zero and then trying to move forward again. And remember, that is because of the effects of trauma in the brain. And so we have to remind ourselves, everything that we do, again, the way that we engage, the way that we work with these families, it all is making a difference. Neural replacement activity takes a long time, and it takes consistent work. And what neural replacement activity is, anything that you do or say that helps repair a trauma brain, right? Because trauma pathways are created. When someone has experienced trauma or toxic stress, trauma pathways are actually created all over the brain, and it creates lots of distress for that individual. All a neural replacement activity is a fancy way of saying a do-over. So anything that you as a provider do or say that helps heal from that trauma, or that says or does something different than an offender or a perpetrator, that's a neural replacement activity. So for instance, if an offender or a perpetrator planted the seed that this child is no good, that they're not worthy, that they're not valuable, that they're expendable, those neural pathways grow and they eat off each other and they fester and they fester, and then here you come along, and the way that you engage and the activities that you do with this child start to send other messages. These other messages are, you are worthy, you are valuable, it's important that you're here, you're important. That is a neural replacement activity. Anything that you say or do that counters the messages left behind from trauma. And so we have to remind ourselves, neural replacement activity is slow. It sometimes is daunting, but you are making a difference. You are repairing the brain. And so let's just start with that entire concept. Are we okay there? We're good? All right. So let's look for kind of an example to help us understand what a neurotypical brain is versus a trauma brain. This is a review from last time, and some of you were not here last time, but I know that in some of the other, in Merced or Fresno, some of those folks might have been here. So this is a gentle review that can stand on its own, but if you were here last time, it builds directly off of that. So if we look at a neurotypical brain, it is a brain that responds to these images. You see this smile, the teacher leaning over, having this smile here, right? You see this teacher here having direct contact with the student, actually looking at the student, having the smile, answering their questions. A neurotypical brain, a brain that has not experienced any trauma, will see this look in an adult or an authority figure. They will see this look, and then immediately they will release feel-good neurotransmitters. That's what happens with the neurotypical brain. Again, a brain that has not experienced any trauma. The moment they see these types of look, anytime an adult or an authority figure says, well done, good job, I like how you've done that. John, I like how you helped collect all the sports equipment off the blacktop today. Well done. Or you're out on an activity with some of your teams that you're working with your agency, and you turn to one of the teens and you say, hey, thanks a lot for helping out there. I really like how you did that. All of that, anything that you do that says, well done, good job, I'm glad you're here. In a neurotypical brain, immediately what will happen is there will be a release of these beautiful chemicals. It's the 3-drug combo. And so these beautiful chemicals are serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. And it's not to say that in your non-neurotypical brain, in your trauma brain, it's not to say that they're not released. But there are other competing neurotransmitters involved, and we'll talk about that in a moment, which is why someone that's experienced trauma doesn't get the same bang for their buck with these 3 love drug combos. So let's go back. A neurotypical brain, a brain that has not experienced any trauma. The moment they hear from an adult or an authority figure, well done, good job, they get a flood of these chemicals. Every chemical, every neurotransmitter that's released has a calling card. It's a little cognitive message that gets left behind. It's a little calling card specifically to that neurotransmitter, to that chemical. So when serotonin gets released, it's a calling card elevating the mood. And it actually leaves behind this cognitive message that, hey, today might be rough, but tomorrow might be better. Hey, this week might be rough, but next week might be better. Or, hey, this month kind of has sucked, but you know what? Next month might be better. That's the cognitive message that is left behind when you have enough serotonin surging through your system. Can you see how it's an element of hope? Everyone kind of see that? It's an element of hope, which is why for the providers in the room that understand depression, we know that people that struggle with depression sometimes have serotonin issues. And so they are typically left with feelings like this. Today was no good, so tomorrow won't be either. This week actually was no good, next week won't be good. And you know what? This month actually sucked, so next month is going to be no good. As a matter of fact, this whole year has kind of been a bummer, so next year I don't really see anything improving. That's the calling card when you're lacking serotonin. That's the cognitive message when you don't have enough serotonin, that neurotransmitter on the scene. Does that make sense? You're all with me on that? So again, if you have a non-traumatized brain, a neurotypical child, getting praise from an adult or an authority figure, they get a burst of serotonin, elevates the mood, and leaves behind the calling card. Whatever is going on in this moment, the next moment might be different. The next moment might be okay. The next moment might be better. So would you all agree? Thumbs up, serotonin, we would like it, right? So that's just one of the combo drugs. Let's look at the next one, dopamine. Now, dopamine, when it hits the system, it leaves behind this calling card, this cognitive message. Wow, whatever is going on, I like it and I want more of it. This feels good. This feels nurturing. This feels nourishing. And so it leaves behind, this neurotransmitter of dopamine leaves behind this element of happiness, right? Of happiness. I want some of whatever's happening. So in a neurotypical brain, when you tell a child, good job, helping in class and doing all this, gets a little dopamine on the scene, right? And so that cognitive message is going to warp into, hey, if you liked how I helped out today, Mrs. Sanchez, you wait till tomorrow. You see how I really help out. So what we know is that when we get dopamine on the system, we have an elevated sense of happiness, and we really want to seek out how to have more of that. So that's your dopamine. Now our last one, oxytocin. This has a beautiful but yet sad story behind it. This neurotransmitter, when it hits the scene, its calling card or cognitive message that gets left behind is that I am lovable. I can give love and I can receive love. That's what oxytocin does for us. It's a beautiful calling card. So a traumatized brain doesn't necessarily get its bang for its buck with all of these, but I want you to focus on oxytocin for a moment. Can you imagine how difficult it would be to maneuver and navigate through life, not knowing if you were lovable, not knowing if you could give love or receive love? Could you see the amount of stutter steps that one would have? A lot of stutter steps without this oxytocin on the scene. Research has let us know that the population that has very low oxytocin levels are our foster children, right? So kind of put it into perspective. Low levels of oxytocin, you're not getting the calling card or the cognitive message left behind that you are lovable, that you can give love and you can receive love. That would create stutter steps all over the place. What we know is that when we have low oxytocin, we have difficulty taking healthy risks because we're often just going to say, nope, it might not work out, and I'm not really lovable anyway, and I'm not really going to step into that. And so we can see them kind of pulling back and not engaging in these healthy risk-taking behaviors. So the 3 love drug combination, you could see where anybody would want to sign up for it. Yeah, right? Some of you are like, where do I sign up now? And so I think the important thing here for us to remember is that a neurotypical, non-traumatized individual, they get bursts of these 3 love drug combinations quite often. Now, how does that play out in behavior? Let's put it all together. When a non-traumatized brain, a neurotypical child, does some type of behavior in a classroom, in a community, in a family unit, and they get this authority look or this adult look back at them, where it's recognized and acknowledged. Good job, I like how you did this, well done. All of a sudden they get that burst of the 3 love drug combo. It allows them to move forward with more behavior that is appreciated. It allows them to recognize what behavior is appreciated, latch onto it, and continue with that behavior in the future. They have an easier time of recognizing what is appreciated, what is expected, what is liked, what is condoned. And so they have an easier time because these neurotransmitters allow that to be solidified. Now, in regards to an individual that is non-neurotypical, meaning there has been some trauma, there's been some rewiring in the brain due to the trauma, they don't actually have as much oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin released. So therefore, they typically have a higher rate of unappreciated behavior, and they often struggle with adopting appreciative behavior, behavior that you have said, this is good, I like this, continue, well done. They have a more difficult time adopting that behavior because there are no neurotransmitters on the scene to help it become solidified. Does that make sense? So a lot of times people are looking in situations, whether it be at school or in the families that you work with, you see these continual behaviors that no one's appreciative of. Not the teachers, not the providers, not the parents, whatnot. These typical behaviors. And you know you've had conversations with the client or the student about these behaviors are not appreciated. However, it's very difficult for that to become solidified because these are the neurotransmitters that help for solidification of appreciated behavior. Does that make sense? That alone should make us realize, hey, this is why I'm typically working with someone on the same behavior over and over and over again, or it should help you recognize the child that you are working with. If there are continual unappreciated behaviors done over and over and over again, that's kind of your caution flag to recognize there could have been some trauma on the scene. Whether or not you have access to their file, whether or not you have access to their history, it should be a cautionary flag for you to realize a neurotypical brain, non-traumatized brain, typically moves forward with more appreciated behaviors when these chemicals are on the scene. But a traumatized brain has difficulty because they don't have so much of these neurotransmitters on the scene, so therefore appreciated behavior is not so solidified. It does not mean that you can have that you can't have a neurotypical non-traumatized child have misbehavior. That's not at all what this is saying. Misbehavior is appropriate. Developmentally, that's what children are supposed to be doing, always testing the sides, testing the edge. But a neurotypical child is going to have an easier time recognizing, oh, I've gone too far, let's not do that. Oh, let me do these behaviors over and over and over again since there's reward, right? And so they're able to quickly ascertain what are the appreciated behaviors that I can move forward with. But a traumatized child is going to have a little bit more difficulty with that. And here's really why. There are 2 other competing neurotransmitters on the scene during trauma. And cortisol and adrenaline are kind of misunderstood neurotransmitters, misunderstood chemicals in the body. And so I want to remind everybody that the moment that trauma happens, there is a flush of cortisol, stress hormone. There's also a flush of adrenaline. Now, cortisol and adrenaline on their own, to a certain degree, are not necessarily negative or damaging. As a matter of fact, a little cortisol and a little adrenaline are quite useful. It helps you focus, it helps you channel your energy, it helps you give you that little bit of oomph so you can go forward with whatever the task is that you're doing. However, trauma doesn't allow a little cortisol and adrenaline on the scene. Trauma, picture a faucet. Trauma turns the faucet on full blast, full blast. The cortisol and adrenaline come out. These are the neurotransmitters that are rushing over the body at that time. So it is too much, too fast, too quick. And if there is repeated, consistent trauma, and you know many of the children you work with, it's not that they had a one-time trauma effect, right? A trauma experience. It's that maybe they've had a couple of years of trauma. Would you agree with that? Right? Maybe the families that you're working with, it's not that they had, a 1 week experience of trauma. It's that there was something consistently and repetitively happening with them. And so this longer experience of trauma. So what that does to your cortisol and adrenaline, it leaves it on a consistent leak, right? Just this consistent drip. And here's where cortisol and adrenaline cause all kinds of problems. One of the things that it does, it causes this dormant brain experience. And dormant brain has a number of characteristics to it. And so and we talked about this last time, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time. In the original training, we kind of pulled it all apart. So I'm gonna go through it rather quickly and give you some insight to it. And correct me if I'm wrong, everyone will get these slides at the end, correct? Because I see some of you writing, which is awesome, but just realize you will also get the slides. And you'll get the link to the first one. Excellent, excellent. I'm sorry, 2 for 1. I like that, 2 for 1. So when we look at dormant brain, here are the characteristics of dormant brain. It often leaves you in survival mode. Just so we can put this really clear, you cannot be in survival mode and learning mode at the same time. It is impossible. It is impossible. So learning mode will always be the one that is kicked off because survival will take primacy. It will take precedence. So survival mode for individuals that have been traumatized often takes over, thereby kicking learning mode out. And you cannot be in both, you cannot be in learning mode or survival mode at the same time. So if your body is believing that it might be in danger or it's a leftover dormant brain experience from your prior trauma, it on many occasions will simply shut down the learning brain completely, just allowing the survival brain up. And the survival brain thinks and does things very differently, as we'll learn as we go through. The 2 emotional mood states that are often visited with dormant brain are anger and rage and despair and depression. These are the mood states that are often tapped into because these were the emotional experiences that followed trauma, So these become your highly visited emotional mood states for the dormant brain. You can see where someone that doesn't have dormant brain, or in clinical literature sometimes referred to as simply trauma brain. So individuals that do not have trauma brain or dormant brain tap into a whole plethora of other emotional mood states. But what we know with trauma brain and dormant brain, these are the 2 emotional mood states that are visited, right? And so what we have is a lot more anger and a lot more depression, a lot more despair, a lot more rage. And then down here you have addictions. So with dormant brain, what we know is that there has been an effect in the dopamine system. Remember how I talked about the 3 earlier neurotransmitters and dopamine was one of them? Well, dopamine is related to all the addictions that are out there. Dopamine is connected to the pleasure pathway. So all addictions, whether it be substance addiction, drugs, whatnot, or behavioral addiction, shopping addiction, cell phone addiction, porn addiction, dopamine reward pleasure pathway is related to all addictions. So a lot of times people will say when they're working with someone that's struggling with addiction, they will often say, well, this person has had trauma in their past, so it makes sense. And it does make sense, but I want you to realize it from a larger perspective versus a reductionistic view. A reductionistic view often goes like this. Whenever you're working with people that are struggling with addicts, you simply say, well, they're struggling. People who are struggling with addiction, I'm sorry. You usually say, well, there's been trauma on the scene. The research does say the individuals that have experienced trauma have a higher rate of addiction. But their use of their substances or their use of their behavioral is not just because they're trying to escape their trauma. That's a reductionistic view. That's how we often talk about it, right? Like you slipped into your drug use or your alcohol misuse or your behavioral misuse. You slipped into that as a way to cope with your trauma, as a way to block it out, as a way to numb. People have heard that before, as a way to numb out. That is all true. But I need you to go a step further and recognize there was something that occurred first. It was damage within the dopamine reward system pleasure pathway. So that means your dopamine system was vulnerable from the get-go. So any of us working with kids, right? Any of us working with kids or families, if you know that trauma is in the historical record, it would behoove you to have a conversation with those teens that simply say this: your pleasure pathway, the dopamine circuitry, is going to be more vulnerable. You have to conduct yourself very carefully. As you age and you maybe explore or experiment with drugs and alcohol, you have to conduct yourself much more carefully than the next person because you already have a vulnerable dopamine system. How did it become vulnerable? During the damage done through trauma. You have to have that conversation. Does that make sense? It doesn't mean that conversation is going to allow the 16-year-old to step back and go, you know what? I'm not going to drink and I'm not going to smoke because I know I have a vulnerable dopamine system due to my early childhood trauma. That would be fantastic if it worked like that, but it doesn't work like that. But when we're working with children and adolescents, we have to start becoming more forthcoming from a neuroscience perspective, So we have to be able to explain to them, your dopamine system, just like some of your other neurotransmitters, is a little bit vulnerable now due to some of your unpleasant experiences that you've had early in childhood. So it's a little bit more vulnerable. And so all this means is handle with care because you're that worthy, you're that important, you're that valuable. That's all it means, handle with care because you deserve that. Do you see how that conversation can roll out in different ways? Excellent. And then our last two characteristics from Dormant Brain, stagnant thought and limited energy flow. What this really means is that in the trauma brain or the dormant brain, all that cortisol and adrenaline keeps some of the regions of the brain from communicating freely like they should. All the different regions of the brain should be communicating with each other, right? Sending all kinds of activity from neuron to neuron through synaptic activities and charges and electrical currents within the brain, all these beautiful connections, right? And what we know is when someone has had cortisol and adrenaline dumpage due to their trauma, it moves like this. Maybe it will make it to the other part of the brain. The brain communicates much slower than it originally would. When I do activities with children, here's how we actually explore this. We talk about being in a room full of syrup and how hard it might be to kind of trudge through a big room full of syrup and how it would really slow us down. And for young kids, an activity, I use a large baking sheet with edges, and we actually pour the syrup in there. And then we take our Lego fellas, right? And we have our little Lego men and women, and we actually talk about how hard it is to move through this syrup. Then I have another baking sheet with no syrup. We've got this different Lego people on there, and we talk about how easy it is to maneuver and navigate through this landscape, right? So all this means is that you have to be kind to yourself, realizing your brain sometimes is like moving through syrup. It does not mean that you are not smart. It does not mean that you cannot succeed. It means you need to handle yourself with care. It means that you also have to ask for assistance at times. It also means you have to let people know, hey, can you repeat that? Can you help me again? Can you show me what you really want me to do on this activity, right? You have to be able to recognize it's a little bit slower. My mind sometimes working through this tar or through this syrup. Does that make sense? Because if you don't, here's what happens. If you don't clarify it with facts, trauma kids will tell themselves a story. And it's usually the crappiest story you've ever heard in your life, right? I'm no good. I am expendable. Whatever happened to me, I must have deserved it, right? They'll fill in the story. The only way that you can start to disintegrate faulty stories, pound in those facts. Always tap in those facts. And the fact is, during unpleasant experiences or trauma experiences, it sometimes releases neurotransmitters in your brain and have everything slow down a little bit, has everything move a little bit slower. Doesn't mean it won't clear up. It most definitely will clear up. As time goes on and we have a chance to heal and we do neural replacement activities, yes, there will be this cleaning up. There will be this less experience of this dormant brain activity. You have to give them the facts and the neuroscience, or else they will simply say, I'm too stupid. That's probably why my dad beat me within an inch of my life, because I'm just too stupid. Does that make sense? So they'll fill in their own storyline. We've got to interrupt the faulty stories that come along with trauma. And the easiest way to do it, tap in facts whenever you can. Tap in facts whenever you can. So that's kind of the dormant brain and all of the characteristics that go along. Now what we'll do is we'll look really quickly at cortisol and adrenaline, just really quickly put it all in perspective. So with cortisol during the acute phase of trauma, cortisol is just rush. Picture you turn the faucet on, cortisol comes rushing through. What it does at that time, the cortisol hits the brain and sends a clear, because neurotransmitters all have messages, right? They all come with a message. The neurotransmitter hits the brain and sends a very quick message. We need to turn certain things off. This kid's in trauma, this kid's in distress, or this adult's in distress. And so one of the first things that it will do is it will close down the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is responsible for memory, right? And so it'll close that down. Specifically, it's responsible for explicit memory. And just to put it in perspective, explicit memory are where your learning blocks are located. And so that's why many times our traumatized kids are a little behind academically. Or have you ever worked with someone and you in a school setting and you look at their grades, maybe first and second grade, and they had all great grades and wonderful engagement and really getting it. And then all of a sudden you read the file and somewhere in third grade, family dynamics changed and trauma was pretty heavy in that family during third grade. And so now you meet the child and they are farther behind than they've ever been. They're all the way back to maybe first or second grade, but they're not academically succeeding where they are. Well, again, cortisol will shut down your learning blocks, your access to your learning blocks, because they're related to the hippocampus. And so that's when you can see someone that was really doing quite well at this age, then trauma introduced itself, and now they're actually academically behind. Does it make sense? We're good? You're with me? So cortisol shuts down this memory piece, this hippocampus. Here's also something important to know. The families that you work with, they don't have a clear picture of what is going on, what happened during the trauma, which is why sometimes you're trying to collect data or trying to collect information. They don't have access to it because remember, when the cortisol hit due to the trauma, the hippocampus shut down, which means they only got certain puzzle pieces to that trauma experience. And so that's why you could be working with a family and you're trying to collect some history, you're trying to collect some data, or you're helping them at school. They've just transferred to a new school and you're trying to collect some information and data. And that family, that mom, that pop, whoever it is, looks at you and they cannot answer the most basic question. Well, I don't know where we were last year. I don't know what his grades were last year. I really don't know. Well, remember on the timeline, if the trauma was around that time period, they only got 50 pieces of the puzzle. And so that means they're missing out on all kinds of information, not only information about the trauma, which is why many times our clients cannot recall everything that was happening during the time of trauma. They don't remember necessarily who was in the house, who was all around. They can't remember who participated in that crime, in that harm, in that abuse. They can't remember who they told. They necessarily can't remember the outcome or the reaction. They can't remember all those pieces. That's because the hippocampus shuts down with too much cortisol. And so they are, for the rest of their life, they're trying to figure out what happened that trauma year. But again, it's like if you were sitting right here and there's a 100-piece puzzle, but I only gave you 50 of the puzzle pieces. Do you see how difficult it would be to put that all together? And by the way, that's a fantastic learning activity for your families. If you know your family as a unit has traveled through some pretty rough trauma, maybe intimate partner violence, domestic violence, whatever type of trauma, and now they are in a place where they are safe and secure and they're trying to heal together, a beautiful activity is to do a 100-piece puzzle activity. Put out 50 pieces of a puzzle. You're holding back 50 pieces of the puzzle. Have the family sit together and try to put it together. And then as you're going on, ask them, what do you think the picture is now? It's very hard to figure out. And don't give them the box that tells them the picture. But ask them, what do you think this puzzle is? It's very hard to figure out. Everyone will have their own opinion. That is equivalent to how they all remember trauma. So if we were in a family unit, you might have puzzle pieces 1932, 81 regarding the trauma. But here, our brother Paul over here, he's got puzzle pieces 28, 72, 91. You have different puzzle pieces. So these two siblings actually remember the trauma quite differently. And then here I am, mom. Well, I got a totally different batch of puzzle pieces. And so I'm listening to my son. And I'm not really sure how you understand that event or how you remember that event. And then I'm listening to my daughter. I'm not really understanding how you remember that event. Versus having that family turn on each other, versus having that family say these types of things, it didn't really happen like that, Paul, right? Or telling the daughter, what's your name? Tamberly. Telling Tamberly, no, that's not what happened. Instead of having that, have everyone do this puzzle activity and resolve themselves to the fact that whatever we went through as a family for those couple of months or for those couple of years, whatever we went through, Cortisol was on the scene in our brain, and therefore you only got some of the puzzle pieces, you only have some of the puzzle pieces, I only have some of the puzzle pieces. There is no need for us to confront and have conflict with each other, resolve ourselves. Cortisol robbed us of 50 pieces of the puzzle. Does that make sense? Right? And you can see immediately how you can have families settle down. And by the way, as a mom, let's say the abuse, let's go a little bit further. Let's say this is my family and the abuse wasn't done to me. You work with these families where the abuse was just done to the children, right? You have those families as well. And then I come to learn of the abuse, right? Remember, my mind wants to protect myself. And so when I hear my children's story of the trauma and the abuse that happened in my home, maybe by a loved one in my very home, a family member in my very family, it would be normal and natural for me to go, no, this didn't happen. And so what will happen is I'm going to look for flaws in your story, right? I'm going to look for flaws in your story. Here's why that is so easy. Because you're not telling me a clear story anyway. You're throwing 50 pieces of a puzzle at me and it doesn't make any sense at all. That's because you only got 50 pieces out of a 100-piece puzzle. It would make sense that my psyche wants to say, this never happened to you, Paul. So-and-so in our family did not cross your boundaries. So-and-so in our family did not violate you. That didn't happen. You're confused. No, Tamberly, that did not happen. You're wrong. We will look for flaws, and here's why. You want your children to have been okay. The hardest thing to openly admit is that you were harmed in our home. You were harmed by a loved one. You were harmed by someone I loved. Does that make sense? So one way to help a family heal through that is this puzzle piece activity, where we actually train an entire family to recognize when cortisol hits the brain, the hippocampus shuts down. And that means no one has an absolutely 100% clear recognition of the trauma. They only have pieces of it, right? But many families get stuck in this huge chaos. And also, maybe your children came to you and they disclosed and you did not believe them the first time, right? And so you want to be able, and the reason why you didn't believe them is the story didn't make any sense. When you work with children and when you work with families, clarify, trauma stories do not make sense because again, you only have 50 pieces of the puzzle in comparison to a 100-piece puzzle. So kind of allow that to happen. So collecting information, if you have these families that are going to a new school, whatnot, go, if you can, if you're a provider and you have the ability, I just learned about a fantastic program over here from Sinjin, where they're able to be in the community, they're able to be at home, they're able to be at school. If there's any possible way that you're working with a child from the community and they're going to go to a new school and you know there's been trauma in the historical record, you know that, it'd be great if a provider could go with them to get that kid enrolled, because the front office staff will always ask questions that seem very basic. Where was your last residence? What grade was your kid in last year? Sounds really simple, doesn't it? What grade? But remember, for someone, for a family that has had trauma happen, those questions are quite hard. And then they go and they don't know how to answer the question. They begin shutting down, and then they tell themselves a story. I'm so stupid as a parent, I can't even answer these basic questions. And before you know it, they flip their lid and are yelling at the office staff, and the office staff is like, oh, one of you, we got your kid coming to our school, right? And so all of a sudden the bad relationship starts right there. So if you could go, so you could be the calming anchor for them to go in and answer questions, because collecting historical data is daunting, even if it's the most basic. Where did you live last year, right? Go with them and be that emotional anchor, whatnot. We're good? All right. Typically, I say, are there any questions? And I'm trying to really limit the questions to our question part when we come back for lunch. So please, if you have a question, make sure you write it down. So adrenaline. So we got cortisol from trauma and we got adrenaline. So here's really how adrenaline works. It helps encode what we call implicit memory, right? So there's actually two types of memory. One is explicit memory. Those are our learning blocks, right? So it kind of cuts that off. And what it does, there's enough adrenaline hitting the scene during trauma, it helps encode what we call implicit memory. And implicit memory can revisit us at any given time. Implicit memory actually travels to us in 4 distinct ways. The reason why it's important for you to know this is that if you're working with a family or a child that has historical trauma, when we realize how implicit memory works, it will help us understand behavior that looks completely bizarre. It will help us understand behavior that seems out of sort and out of place. It will help us understand behavior, especially when we're questioning ourselves. You know, did I set this kid off? Did I set this parent off? What did I say? What did I do? But when we understand implicit memory, it slows us down in a really healthy way, so we engage differently. So when we have adrenaline hitting the brain, again, blocks explicit memory just like cortisol, but it actually encodes implicit memory. So really quickly, here are 4 ways that implicit memory lays down. One way is perceptual memory, and here's what that is. Whatever caused the harm now is misperceived going on from the trauma, going forward from the trauma. So for instance, if a child had a mouse come after it, a mouse get into its room or whatnot, and that was very traumatizing, then at that moment, cortisol and adrenaline hit the brain. And so now perceptual memory, anytime they see mice in the future, they don't see mice, they see mice, right? That's perceptual memory. So it's much bigger, much worse than it is. But we're not here talking about abatement or rodents, are we? This picture really would be of an individual, because who harms children? It's usually adults, right? It's not that children cannot harm other children, we do know that, but typically harm done is from adults to children. So what this really is, perceptual memory, helps you misperceive all future adults, which is why most of our trauma kids do not necessarily care for school sometimes. Because if you were all working at my school, all of you are just lovely adults. I got my school counselors here, I got my admin here, principal, assistant principal, I got student services here, I've got coaches here, right? And so I walk into that school, but if I have perceptual memory issues, here's what's going on. You're a possible perpetrator, you're a possible offender, you could possibly harm me. How will you harm me? Will it be similar to how I've been harmed in the past? So you see, when they enter a school, it's not all, yay, I'm happy to be here, look at my cool new backpack. Instead, it's all, look at the possible perpetrators right here, and I have to spend 8 hours with them. Does that make sense? So you can see perceptual memory is going to throw us off a bit. Next one is emotional memory. And this implicit memory piece goes like this. Picture a gunny sack, right? So in your brain, you got a gunny sack. Trauma is happening. Whatever emotions you're going through during the time of trauma get put into this gunny sack, all the emotions. So just throw out some emotions. What are some typical emotions if you're going through a particular trauma? What feelings might come up? Sadness, fear. What else? Anxiety. What else? One more time. Anger. So we have all kinds of emotions that happen during that time of trauma. So they go into an emotional gunny sack in the brain. Implicit memory simply means that these can come out to visit at any time. Keep in mind, 4 ways implicit memory is laid down. I'm going to walk you through all 4. But they do not need to be invited. They do not need to be triggered up. That's not how implicit memory works. Implicit memory can just flow in. So that means I can be in 7th grade math class, and all of a sudden, the gunny sack in my mind that's been filled up with emotions from my trauma is starting to unravel. Not that anything's going on. In 7th grade, I'm in science class, everything's going well, there's no trigger, there's nothing going on, but for whatever, implicit memory is simply starting to, is visiting. They don't have to visit all together. They can, but they don't have to visit all together. And so here I am, 7th grade science class, it becomes unraveled, and all of a sudden I'm trying to figure out, why do I feel so fearful? Why do I feel so scared? Why do I feel so anxious? How come I feel so angry, right? It would be wonderful if implicit memory had cognitive awareness to it. Because if it had cognitive awareness, this is what I would say. Hey, I'm in 7th grade science class. It's all good. That's my teacher. I know my teacher. They're cool. And I have nothing to be worried about. These emotions that are flooding up right now, well, that's due to my unpleasant experiences in my early childhood where trauma was had. But I'm actually okay. Do you see if it had a cognitive message? It would be fine. That's not how it works. Implicit memory does not travel with cognition, which is why providers are supposed to be adding cognition to it. Make sense? You good? You with me? So starting to unravel, and before you know it, if you're a 7th grader in science class and all of a sudden you're overflown with fear and terror and all the emotions that go along with being traumatized, what are you going to do? Are you going to sit happily in that science class and watch the teacher make a volcano and just smile and go, oh, I love you? Is that what you're going to do? What would you do? What might you do? Think like a 7th grader. What might you do to change up the scenario and what's happening right now? Because you just got ugly feelings bathing all over you. What might you do? I would totally act out. Someone in that class is getting punched. I guarantee you, right? Someone in that class, or I might act out directly to the teacher, right? I got some names for you. And then all of a sudden, I have just changed the entire scenario, And it's a way to kind of have the catharsis of these ugly feelings that are bathing over me and I can't explain it and I don't know why they're happening. And so I'm going to cause a giant distraction. And distractions are not pleasant, right? They're usually really aggressive. They're really messy. And they also leave people wondering, what happened? They often leave teachers going, oh my gosh, what happened? We were doing volcano lessons, science. And so it often leaves others looking at this behavior, not understanding it. Where did this come from? What set him off, right? And we change the narrative when we talk to teachers in schools and we explain implicit memory, because then many times teachers can go, oh, let me settle down. This wasn't me. I do happen to know there was historical trauma. I don't know much about it, but I do know that about this child. And it leaves a little bit of room to go, that might have been implicit memory at play. Yeah, it's not that the 7th grader is anti-volcano, right? That might have been implicit memory at play. It just allows a little bit of sacred safe space before you come down with consequences, before you come down with punitive measures. So that's emotional memory, the revisiting of the emotional mood states that took place during the trauma. And the first one was perceptual memory, the misinterpretation of others, right? And then here we go, procedural memory. This is one of the memory types that's really difficult for people to understand. Procedural memory is really about the realization that your body betrayed you at a time of need. Procedural memory is knowing that you want to swing and hit, or you want to kick, or you want to use your legs to run, but your legs are not running, your legs are not moving, your hand is not coming up, you're not hitting, or your voice, you know you want to scream, but your voice isn't coming out. Some of us have been scared in our life before where we know we wanted to scream and we're like, nothing comes out, right? Have you ever been that scared? Some of us have been that scared. Procedural memory is knowing that you want your body to do something and it will not. That's procedural memory. So now it's implicit. So fast forward, let's go again. Let's go with the 5th grader. We got a 5th grader in class. And all of a sudden, there's this belief that my body will not be here for me when I need it to. My body might not conduct itself in the way I need it to conduct itself if there's danger. And so now that child in that classroom where nothing's going on, there's no trigger, is really feeling that, hey, I have no power in the world. I have no control in the world. There's nothing that I can do to help myself if I ever needed it. Again, what would that 5th grader do in class if all of a sudden they're having these kind of thoughts and feelings and realizations? What might they do? Are they going to sit in it happily? Are they going to sit in it and keep doing their geometry homework? No. Someone's getting hurt in that class. There's going to be a chair flying. There's going to be books flying. Or you know what? I'm just going to pick off, and the people in the school are going to wonder where I'm at. Paraprofessionals are going to be running all over the school trying to find me, right? So you wouldn't sit in it. It would be beautiful, again, if it had a cognitive message, and the cognitive message went like this. Hey, I know exactly what's happening. Right now, I'm having the experience that my body is betraying itself, but that comes from an unpleasant childhood experience. I'm actually okay. See, if there was a cognitive message tied to it, it would be different. Once again, implicit memory doesn't work like that. That's where providers come in. You help create the cognitive message that needs to go along when implicit memory visits. Our last one, bodily sensation memory. This is where your body actually can remember the hurt and the harm that was done to it. Rather it was, someone in the family unit often grabbing your arm and twisting it to the point of fractures, twisting it and to the point in which it was harmed and sprained, or other types of harm that you all are aware of because you work with these families. You're aware of the type of harm that can be done to children. And so bodily sensation memory is that the body actually holds on to that memory. There's a fantastic book out there, Body Keeps the Score, by Vanderkolk, and it actually is all of the research related to that. But what we know, it's part of implicit memory. So once again, here we go. Let's go with the 4th grader. We got a 4th grader in class, and nothing is happening in class, right? All's good. Or you're at home doing a family session, right? You're at home, and everyone's safe. Everyone's in the family session. You're doing a great family session that's about something pretty simplistic, improved communication. And then all of a sudden, you've got this kid, age 12, really starting to become uncomfortable, really starting to act out with some bizarre behavior, really trying to grab for some crazy distractions. And in reality, what we might know is you could have a child where implicit memory is visiting, and what is taking place is they are feeling as if their arm is being twisted and broken in that moment, but no one's touching them, or other parts of their body are being harmed, or their ribs are being cracked like they're being punched again, or other parts of the flesh is hurting in certain ways. And so now they are stuck there going, what is happening to my body? What is happening? Well, in order to stop that, they're going to create some type of distraction, and it's going to be the wildest family session that you've ever had, right? And so what we have to remember is that trauma visits in 4 implicit memory ways. And again, they do not always travel together. They do not have to be triggered up. They can be triggered. They can be triggered for sure, but it does not require, implicit memory does not require a trigger. They are actually unwanted and unscheduled visits. You never know when they're happening, you never know when they're coming. That's how implicit memory can cause all of these types of behaviors that really leave us as providers scratching our head, right? Have you been there before? Or you hear about it, right? The school says, hey, here's what happened at 11:04 on Tuesday, but you've been seeing that kid for a couple of weeks and you've never seen that type of behavior. That could simply mean that implicit memory does not visit during the times in which you happen to be seeing them, but implicit memory might have visited during these other times. So those are kind of your 4 ways that implicit memory or trauma memory is laid down. So implicit memory doesn't have a story to it. Explicit memory usually has a story to it, which is why developmentally, when you ask kids questions and they tell you and they answer it in story format, right? They typically answer it in story format. That's explicit memory, learning blocks at work. Implicit memory does not have a story to it. It doesn't have a story to it and leaves people feeling, well, if we're going to be very honest, it leaves people feeling crazy. If you had these experiences rush over you, nothing's going on, but all of a sudden you have this emotional overload, nothing's going on, and all of a sudden you're perceiving everyone as possible person to hurt you, nothing's going on, and all of a sudden you're feeling aches and pains in your body, right? Nothing's going on, but you have this sense of dread that you could not protect yourself if needed, right? That leaves people feeling insane, absolutely insane. So if we can remember that as providers, and if we can teach that to the families that are raising children that have had trauma, it helps calm everyone down. The moment you introduce the facts, everyone can calm down and stop blaming themselves or stop looking for a needle in a haystack, such as the reason why you're acting out is this or this or that. Stop looking for a needle in a haystack and realize if there's historical trauma, there are things happening behind the scenes that we are not even aware of. Does that make sense? You good? So trauma can have you think, feel, and behave in unfortunate ways that don't necessarily make linear or sequential sense. It's just like a massive puzzle where pieces are trying to get put in but don't make sense. If you're working with families where there are siblings, keep in mind that's going to be a more chaotic family. If they all went through trauma, and it's because they all have different puzzle pieces of the trauma, therefore they all think and behave in different ways, but still typically very unappreciated ways, right? So just be aware. Now with this sign, with this image, it's just a nice review, and those of you that have seen it before, you're hopefully comfortable with it. I went over it last time. I'm going to go over it very briefly and then tie it into a new way to intervene. But those of you that haven't seen it before, don't panic because it looks a little bit overwhelming, but don't panic. It's all awesome. So here we go. You have your thalamus, you have your cortex, and you have your amygdala. In typical brain processing, a neurotypical child, typical brain processing, information comes in from the outside world through the thalamus. And by the way, the number one way it makes it to the thalamus is through the eye, through your visual. It can also come in through different senses, what you see, what you smell, what you taste, what you experience, what you feel. And so it absorbs that information from the outside world, sends it to the thalamus. And the thalamus has this information. And the thalamus immediately shoots this information up here to the cortex, the smart part of the brain, the cortex. So the cortex takes this ball of information in a neurotypical child where everything is typical brain processing. It takes this ball of information and the cortex looks at it And it checks it for facts. It pulls out things that are not true, things that are not factual, and it actually injects it with facts. So immediately, in a matter of just milliseconds, the ball of information that came through the thalamus from the outside world is a smarter ball of information than it ever was prior, because it made it to the cortex, tosses out things, and injects facts. Then the cortex immediately sends it down here to the amygdala. And the amygdala is your alarm center, right? And so it sends it down here to the amygdala, and it makes a choice. Are you in danger? Let's push the alarm. Are you not in danger? Not pushing the alarm, carry on. That's how typical brain processing happens. For a traumatized brain, here's what we know. The cortex is often offline. It has difficulty staying online. It has difficulty coming back online until you teach certain strategies, specifically mindfulness strategies. Then you get your cortex back on. So with our traumatized kids, they actually communicate from thalamus to amygdala. You should all realize that this communication highway, that is your survival highway. That is, as a species, how we survived. Information that was happening out in the world would come in and then go to the amygdala first to let us know, do we need to push the alarm to help with your survival? So this is actually survival communication pathway. You don't want to use it because you miss out on all the smart information that you should have about what's going on. But traumatized kids often communicate from thalamus to amygdala. So with that being said, remember how we talked about implicit memory. Everybody remember 4 ways of implicit memory? Here's where implicit memory lays, right in front of the amygdala. So if I have implicit memory, meaning I have some puzzle pieces of my trauma, whatever traumas I've been through in my history, if I have some puzzle pieces, they are here prior to the amygdala. So now picture me as a traumatized kid. Information comes in through the thalamus. Remember, it travels along here and never makes it up to the cortex. It goes through what? All my trauma memories, which is why traumatized kids misinterpret things all the time. They misconstrue situations. A teacher says, hey, I need you to move from activity A to activity B. They take that information in from the thalamus, and it goes through all the time they've ever been violated, their boundaries have been crossed, they've been hurt, they've been harmed, they've been emotionally neglected, and it goes through that information first, thereby creating a misinterpretation of the scenario. Then the amygdala says, hey, I got you, don't worry, I'm sounding the alarm. And then now we have the amygdala on fire. And there's only 3 things you can do when the amygdala is on fire. It's going to answer fight, flight, or freeze. When in reality, there is nothing going on that you have to fight, flight, or freeze about. This is an important concept right here from the neuroscience place. Any 4th grader can understand this. When you start to explain it to them as an intervention, when you start to explain how the brain works, you are then going to introduce why it's always important to breathe and ask for assistance before you do anything, to let people know, hey, I think my volcano's going off. Hey, I think my alarm's going off, right? Be able to ask for assistance, or ahead of time know where you would go for assistance. That's why some schools have calming corners now, right? That's why you have calming areas. Some people have a calming couch, whatever it may be. You want to be able to recognize, hey, when I'm escalated, I want to know where I can go. If we help explain this to them prior to escalation, they will stop telling themselves stories such as, I'm a bad kid tearing up the classroom, right? Instead, they're going to start saying, you know what? My unpleasant events have a little bit of memory. I never use the word trauma with kids. I always use the word unpleasant events. My unpleasant events are actually stored in this area prior to the amygdala, which leads to me sometimes misinterpreting things. Clarify that, teach them that when they are calm, so that they stop telling themselves this. It's just me being an idiot again. It's just me tearing things up again because I can't be a part of the classroom. It's just me losing all my friends again because maybe I'm not worthy of having friends, right? It's just me getting what I deserve, just like I deserved to be hurt when I was a kid, right? They'll tell themselves faulty narratives. Introduce the science to them and actually say, here's what's going on. Unpleasant events are stored right here. So when information comes in and visits you, it many times allows you to misinterpret things and misconstrue things. We're good? So if it goes through all that misinformation, right, all those puzzle pieces from the past, then it can result in the alarm being, because remember, the amygdala, its job is to save you. Its job is to help you live another day. And so it's going to only allow you to fight, flight, or freeze. And we went over this really heavily in the first one. So make sure you look at the video link if you need just a kind of a review or a recap on how the amygdala actually works. But it can only give you these 3 answers. The amygdala is a very important piece of machinery for living and surviving, but it's not very savvy because it only has 3 answers. So if the alarm gets pushed, you will react in one of these ways. So now let's kind of talk about when information passes through, right? It goes from the thalamus to the amygdala. When it passes through the random puzzle pieces of your trauma, you're going to misinterpret things. So this may be your intent as a provider, as a mental health therapist, that might be your intent. As a teacher, that might be your intent. As someone that does home visits, that might be your intent. You're coming in, you're smiling, you're like, hey, what's up? I'm here to work with your family. My name's Jen, right? You could show up at schools. You're like, hey, welcome. It's nice to meet you. This is your intent. Would you agree? If this is not your intent, you're in the wrong field. This should be your intent, right? That you're coming at them like this. I want you to know when the information comes in through the thalamus, that look from you comes in through the thalamus and goes through their trauma puzzle pieces. This is what they're seeing. Can you see the misinterpretation? Right? So, thank you, Lenora. Yes. And so what we know is that your intent might be solid. You are walking up, you are engaging, you're introducing yourself like you have to 20 other kids that day, right? If at that moment they are not doing so well, that means your intent went through these 50 puzzle pieces. And then you've got a kid reacting on you. Then you're in the car later on after lunch crying, going, why did I take this job? I should have been an accountant. I should have been a sales card person. This would have been so much better. Like, you're beating yourself up. How did I trigger this kid? What did I say? What did I do? I need you to realize there are things occurring behind the scenes. And here's why. If you only take it personal, you do not leave room for neuroscience. You have to leave room for neuroscience. Then when you meet that kid next week, you have a little bit more ego armor on, and you realize there are things behind the scene that do not allow him or her to see you like this, because this was your intent, right? But they're actually seeing you like this. If you knew someone saw you like this, if you knew that, would you come rushing up? Hey, Paul, it's me, Jen. It's good to see you again. Would you rush up? Would you swing out to touch? Nah. Would you do your Italian style talking, hands all over the place? No. You would do slight modification, right? And so if Paul was the child I'm meeting at school, right? And I already know there's historical trauma, and my intent is here, but I've been educated in neuroscience and I know he may see this, then it's going to be a little bit more like this. Paul, I was here last week. Do you remember? I'm Jen. I'm going to stand back. I'm also going to put my hands out. If I walk into middle schools, I often have my hands in my pockets, right? And what that does is it sends a subtle message, right? You can see how I'm sized up. And I'm a hand talker, by the way. I'm a natural hand talker. And so I a lot of times holding my hand behind my back, but I will bring it out so Paul can see it, right? But then I'm also going to put it back. I'm going to put it back so he can see, he can size me up. I'm also not going to come up on him quick. I'm also, when I show up and it's on the playground, I'm going to let him see, I'm going to watch him, and I'm going to wait until I can get in his peripheral vision and let him see me first. And then I'm going to stop, and he'll see me. He's on the playground playing with his friends, and he'll see me, and he's like, oh, I remember her, right? I'm going to let you see me first, and I'm going to be standing still. Then I'm going to walk after you see me, all right? Too much to take in. All that information coming in through the thalamus, going through all of those trauma puzzle pieces. I don't want that amygdala alarm set off, and I don't want anything I can do to keep this perception from coming forth. Does that make sense? So this piece is for you. Now let's switch it a little bit for our children that we work with and our families that we work with. So let's just take a look at this picture. That's a cute picture, right? Some of you should go, oh, some of you should say, who are those people, right? It's Bernstein Bears, right? But let's kind of look at this picture. You got happy balloons, see the happy faces? Hi, that's so cute. Look, the frog is even happy. The frog's happy. You got people, you know, everything's going good. It's a bright day. Would you agree? Okay. Here's what I want you to know. When information comes in through the thalamus, goes across that survival pathway, passes through all of your puzzle pieces of trauma, you do not have necessarily reality view. You have what we call a trauma view. Now look at this picture. Is it different? It's drastically different. Those balloons not so happy. You know, the frog might have a smile, but it doesn't look like a happy smile, right? If we're going to be honest, that looks like a little manipulative smile. Something going on there, right? And do you see the gloominess of the day? And do you see the eyes? So here's what we need you to know. When you're working with families that have been traumatized, again, you're coming in with your intent. Hey, I'm your caseworker. I'll be in your house 2 times a week. Woo! What might be happening is they're seeing all this. Who are you? What is really going on? But it allows us to have a little bit more clarity. And here's where the clarity is. Remove yourself from this complete scene. It's not about you, the provider anymore. Remove yourself completely. You can see how this would be a typical day for a 4th grader going to school. School doesn't look so exciting, right? Or a typical day for a kid going out to the playground. Everyone else goes out to the playground, they're happy. I want you to know a trauma view is going to shade that a little bit. A trauma view is going to have them always looking for who's going to hurt me on this playground. Who's going to cross my boundaries on this playground? What's going to go awful and ruined on this playground? And so we just want to remind ourselves this may be the reality view. But the children that you're working with or the families that you're working with, this is a trauma view. Okay? Fantastic. And if you want these slides, remember these slides are for you. You would use your judgment, your clinical judgment, how you would use these slides. I'm going to tell you what, in IEPs, student study teams, and 504 plan meetings, when I go in to attend those meetings without the family or the child there, I bring these 2 pictures because I just want to remind all school staff. I see that you love your school and you think your school is the best and you think your teacher is the best. And I want you to know I hear you because really what you're presenting is your school is like this. I want you to know that. But the kid that we're going to have coming in this 504 plan meeting or this SST or this IEP, I want you to know this is how he sees your school. Let's just put it in perspective. And the reason why he sees your school like this is because he has been so hurt and so violated that he's not trusting and he has enough puzzle pieces on his survival pathway that it's doom and gloom. So yay for your school, but this is how your kid is seeing it. Does that make sense? Good, good. So figure out when you would use that. Here's what I'd like to do. We're gonna do a 5-minute activity, simple 5-minute activity. Don't worry, no one has to get up. We don't have to touch each other, nothing like that. Just at your table, all I want you to do is identify when you would use these 2 slides. When you would use these 2 slides. Rather it be with individuals, rather it be family unit, school, just choose a couple of areas. Let's do that 5-minute activity, okay? All right, due to time constraints, let's go ahead and come on back. Hopefully you've identified a couple of arenas or venues where you might use this imagery to assist, right? You might use this imagery to assist. And remember, this imagery is an attempt to help someone develop an actual factual cognitive script to what might be going on in their life. Because if you don't do that, if you don't introduce facts to them based in neuroscience, what have we learned? They will tell themselves a faulty narrative, such as, I see the world like this because that's all I'm worthy of. I see the world like this because I'm broken and defective, right? Versus, hey, wait a minute, time out. Let's add some facts here. Let's add some science to this. You actually might see the world like this because there are a lot of puzzle pieces stuck in your brain from unpleasant experiences that have happened in the past. You're not broken and you're not defective. As a matter of fact, your brain is working the way that it is, the way that it should be, which is it's trying to make sense out of things. And so me as your provider, I'm going to assist you in making sense out of it. And let's start with this fact. There are senseless acts in the world, such as children being harmed. Stop trying to make sense out of senseless acts. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to begin the healing and recovery process. And the first way to do that is to really show you some science. This view is not of your choosing. This view is not because you are broken or defective. This view is because your brain is trying to remind you, you've got some unpleasant stuff in the past, and you've got to learn some new ways of handling yourself today. Or you have some unpleasant stuff in the past where you've got to identify and resolve yourself. It was not your doing. Remember, treatment does not call for you to have to hear someone's trauma story. That is old school clinical work. You do not have to have someone tell their trauma story over and over and over again in order to heal. That has actually been found not accurate. People can tell you what elements of their story they want, and sometimes you're going to come across a client that needs and wants to tell their trauma story in as much detail as you can. If that is a want of theirs, check to make sure that it is for a healing want and not a want to continue to beat themselves up. If it is, I want to make a little bit more sense and get some clarity on what really happened from ages 3 to 7. And I feel that if I got some clarity, I might be able to move forward. If you hear that as a clinician, then you can hear their story. But you do not have to prompt and tear them apart and pull their story out. If they want to tell your story, then you be vigilant and listen and hear and create safe space to receive it. And then you correct the faulty thinking that is embedded in their story. So anytime they say things like, if I only would have gotten better grades, my dad wouldn't have beat me. Well, let's kind of talk about that a little bit. That doesn't sound really factual. Would you mind if we talked about how other people handle bad grades? They don't all beat their children. Did your dad only beat you through bad grades? Was there ever a time that there was physical abuse without bad grades? Well, yeah, there were these other times. So then it wasn't about grades. It sounds like this might have been about your dad's struggle with how to handle himself and his own anger and his own feelings and his own emotions. It sounds like maybe your dad never had the opportunity to learn how to handle feelings or to learn how to communicate them out. And so he had a way of acting that wasn't healthy for anyone, not him, not you. So those are the facts. Can you hear that? You see that difference? But you do not have to pull someone's trauma story out. If they are wanting to lay down pieces of it, you are to listen for faulty elements within the story and then correct it, right? That's what we do as providers. So this trauma view is not due to your choosing and not due to you being broken or defective. It's due to you having a lot of mucky puzzle pieces floating around where maybe we need to figure out a way to process them and resolve ourselves. This was not my doing. Whatever trauma happened to me, I never ever raise my hand and say, hey, I can't wait to have a childhood where I'm beaten within an inch of my life every day. Hey, I cannot wait to have a childhood where my boundaries are crossed and violated by the very people I love. No one ever raises their hand and says that, ever. And so we have to get to a place where we reach resolution. I might have had a number of people in my lives that did not know how to conduct themselves when they were under stress, that did not know how to conduct themselves in healthy ways when emotions took over them, right? And so I have to resolve myself to the facts. That was my perpetrator's doing. That was my offender's doing. And there was nothing that I did to ask for it, and it was not my fault. Right? As we have those types of healing conversations, what you have is these mucky puzzle pieces begin to be not so important. And so they don't invade and intrude when information comes in through the world through the thalamus or comes into the mind through the thalamus. We don't have so many mucky puzzle pieces reaching out and grabbing them and then activating the amygdala. That's when you know you have some healthy healing and recovery elements occurring. So one way to kind of share it out, right? Number one is you have the imagery and you share it out. When I'm working with very young kids, I go back to that three-point brain, right? I go back to this one right here. Thalamus, cortex, and amygdala. And I have conversations about how awesome the cortex is. It's the smart part of the brain. It does decision making. It does problem solving. And we have beautiful conversations about how awesome it is to have Captain Cortex on the scene. We have information like that all the time. And then we share out. People who have had unpleasant experiences sometimes don't get their full cortex. Sometimes Captain Cortex leaves, especially during times when you really need Captain Cortex to be on the scene, right? And so we have those types of conversations, eventually getting to this. Life is hard without our cortex. Life is difficult without our cortex. Life is hard without our thinking cap on. Remember, the cortex is a smart part of the brain. Life is so much more easier to maneuver and navigate through when you have your thinking cap on. You make better choices, you make better decisions. You can actually talk to yourself and say, whoa, calm down a little bit. You can actually give yourself suggestions before you do something, right? You know, you have clinicians and case managers all the time teaching, stop, think, and act. Anybody ever heard that? Right? We're teaching that all the time, stop, think, and act. If you don't have your cortex engaged, stop, think, and act is equivalent to teaching me physics. It's not going to go anywhere, and I'm not going to know what you're saying, and I'm probably going to think you're high. Yeah, so here's what we have to remember. We've got to slow it down and first give rationale as to why certain interventions like stop, think, and act might not be working with this child. Explain to this child, we might not have our thinking cap on. So actually, let's go back to ground zero and learn how to get our thinking cap back on. Those are the interventions that you go with first. Then you can do stop, think, and act all day long. Then you can do consequential thinking skills. Remember, consequential thinking skills is if I do A and I do B, C will happen. And then you ask yourself, am I okay with C? If I'm not okay with C, yikes, then let me change up the scenario. Let me not do A or B. That's consequential thinking. You cannot teach stop, think, and act or consequential thinking skills until you get the cortex engaged. So your first treatment approach must always be, how do you get your thinking cap back on? How do you get the cortex engaged? How do you invite Captain Cortex back on the scene? Hey man, I need you. That's your first piece of business. Then you can do STA, stop, think, and act. And then you can do consequential thinking all day long, because then when you teach it, it will have a place to land. Remember, things that you teach to a child or an adult have to have a place to land and anchor in the brain. The place that it lands and anchors is in the cortex. So if the cortex is not available, whatever you're teaching might be great. Has no place to land, no place to anchor. You will come back next week as if you never taught stop, think, and act, as if you never taught consequential thinking skills, as if you never taught whatever intervention you're doing. The cortex has got to be on. It has got to be on. So your first role of business, get the cortex back engaged. So one of the ways in which we want to be able to share out with people is explain to them what the cortex does and what lower parts of the brain do. So this upstairs, downstairs brain, this slide is really helpful for parents. For whatever reason, they appreciate this slide. So if you're working in family units, make sure you kind of share this out. The upstairs part of the brain, the cortex, it's your smart part of the brain. It's responsible for doing all of this kind of stuff, right? Think before we act, decision making, whatnot. And then over here are downstairs of the brain. That's our fight and flight, our amygdala, our emotional centers, our bodily reactions, how we react to whatever's happening in the environment. That's a downstairs part of the brain. So after I do a little neuroscience with children, I'll ask them, which one benefits us on a typical boring day, right? It's boring day. It's fourth grade. You're going to class on a typical boring day. Upstairs part of the brain benefit us, or downstairs part of the brain? And then let your kid sit and look at this slide and think about it. Hopefully you've already done the 3-point slide, taught them a little bit about the brain. A child is going to answer you, my upstairs part of the brain. On just a regular, typical, boring day, I want my upstairs part of the brain working. Yeah, it would make it a lot easier, right? Then you have buy-in to teach how to get the cortex on, because the upstairs part of the brain is the cortex. So you simply want them to answer, yes, on a boring day, I want my upstairs cortex brain working. Then you can move into, hey, let's teach you some ways to get your cortex back on. Now, on benefits of a non-boring day, one in which you have been threatened and you have been harmed. The cortex goes offline, the upstairs goes offline, downstairs brain comes on because it's a survival brain. And so it's supposed to act without thinking. It's just supposed to start swinging and scrapping to make you live another day. It's supposed to activate that alarm system and activate that amygdala. But what we know is that you're typically involved in a boring day. So you do not do this type of work when you know that someone is still engaged in trauma. It's when they are out of trauma, when you're doing that type of treatment and that type of work. But simply ask a kid, what you want, the downstairs or you want the upstairs? when you're going into 7th grade, when you're going into 9th grade, when you're going to go try out for tuba in the band, when you're going to go over to the in-laws, when you're going to go this, when you're going to go that, what do you want? You downstairs or upstairs? Most of the time they're going to answer upstairs because they want all of that. I want to have some control over my emotions. I want to have some control over my focus. Yeah, I want to be able to concentrate. I want the upstairs working. All right, then let's move forward and figure out how to do that. We're good? All right. So last time I explained a little hand model. So far you've seen different, you got the slide for upstairs, downstairs. You got the slide for the thalamus, cortex, amygdala. You've got these different slides that really are helping you understand the regions of the brain. But you want to teach your child or your family something that they can have with them all the time, which is the hand model. So this hand model, we could just do it really quick. Everyone kind of raise your hand up. See where your 4 fingers are? This is considered your cortex, and that's our smart part of the brain, right? That's your thinking cap. Then fold your thumb over, right? So you got your thumb right here. This is your limbic system. This slide describes it all. But the thumb right here, this is your limbic system. Your amygdala and your hippocampus are all right here. And what do we know floats around the amygdala? Those puzzle pieces of trauma. So limbic system, the emotional part of the brain. And then down here, you have your brain stem leading down to your spinal cord. So fold your hand over your thumb. The hand model is supposed to be like this. It's a model of the brain in your head, right? Like this, right? So if we peeled back your forehead, the first thing we would see is your cortex. If we peeled back your cortex, then what we would see is your emotional limbic system. Specifically, we would see your amygdala, we see your hippocampus. If we had an ability to identify those floating trauma pieces, we would actually see them near the amygdala right here on the emotional part of the brain. If we lifted that up, we would also see where your brain sets on your brain stem and down your spinal cord, which is why whenever you have neurotransmitter releases to whatever's happening in your life, it goes right on down to your nervous system and sends it out to your body. That's why you have bodily reactions, all right? So everyone got that? So you fold it over like this. Look at where your fingers are touching. Everyone, can you see where your fingers are touching? There are some of your fingers, you got a little bit of finger touch going on in the thumb, yeah? Do you have a little finger touch down here in the palm area? Not a lot, but a little bit. Maybe the tips of the finger should be touching this part of the hand. This is an integrated brain. It's supposed to be symbolic that the cortex is able to communicate to the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, and able to communicate to all other areas of the brain. This is a regulated, integrated brain. What we know is that when we experience trauma or any negative emotional mood state, we all have a tendency to flip our lid. Now, are my fingers touching other parts of my brain? That means I do not have access to my cortex. I do not have access to my smart part of my brain. The answers are up here, and I cannot get to them until I learn how to calm myself down and get my lid back on. This is called flipping your lid. This is a dysregulated brain. This is a disintegrated brain where you're coming at the world from your emotional place. You're coming at the world very raw, from your hurt place, from your limbic system. What we know about traumatized kids, they often come at the world like this, right? Your non-traumatized kids can flip their lid when they enter a negative emotional mood state, but they have an easier time getting their lid back on. They also have an easier time keeping their lid on. So they typically come at the world very smart with their thinking brain on, which is why they learn, oh, I can't do this in Mrs. Sanchez's class. Oh, I need to watch myself in Paul's class. Oh, I need to make sure when I go to my auntie's house, I don't do this. They come at the world with this smart thinking cap, but our traumatized kids come at the world really raw, hurt, vulnerable, and emotional, not always making the best choices. So the reason why you want to teach this to your family, right, all the families that you work with, is when they flip their lid, they might not be able to voice that out calmly. Think about one time when you flipped your lid, right? You're at home, things aren't going well. Okay, well, I did this last time. Pretend you're driving on the freeway, right? Someone pulls in front of you, and you're like, someone pulling, you start yelling. You flipped your lid because you're not even making any sense, right? And you're just mouthing the F word over and over, and that person's driving by, right? And so you've come at them very raw and emotional. The cortex, if it was on, the cortex would have said, Jen, calm it down. You're safe. Get in the slow lane. Put your phone down. Goodness. The cortex would be talking to me, right? Calming me down, saying, you're safe. You're going to get home tonight. But I flipped my lid, and that's why. And some of you have done some amazing things on the freeway. You roll the window down. You give some people the one finger salute. Or you drive up and you give them the face, right? You give them the moral lesson through your face, whatnot. That all is from your limbic system, because your cortex would say, stop staring at people like that on the freeway. They may shoot you, right? Yeah. So just as a human species, we often flip our lid and we say things we can't take back. Those of you that have been in conflict with a loved one, you sometimes say things that, well, I have job security with marriage counseling. You come in and I'm giving you marriage counseling just because one night you said something you can't take back. If the cortex was on, the cortex would have said, don't say that, Jen. That's going to take 3 years of marriage counseling to clean up. Don't say it. Don't say it. But instead, the emotional outpouring of the conflict, you flipped your lid and you said it, right? And then now you come to my office and I get to bill your insurance and it's good. But if you would have learned to put your lid down, I'd be out of a job. So here's what we need to remind ourselves. We have to teach this model of the brain to our families, because many times an entire family unit that has been through trauma, this is my family again, all right? An entire family unit that has been through trauma. Paul's got his lid flipped. I'm the mom. I got my lid flipped. Tamberlee's got her lid flipped. We're all coming at each other with the limbic system. We make no sense at all, and we're saying things we can't take back. We're saying things, my life would have been better if you hadn't been born. That is not how I truly feel. But if my lid's flipped, my emotional side is saying the most atrocious things that come from my historical trauma, right? You've got kids yelling back other things. Why didn't you protect us? You're our mom. It was your place to protect us. That might be factual, but it might not be the time to say that, right? Might not be the time. So what you have is you've got 1 powder keg, 2 powder keg, 3 powder keg. You get too many powder kegs in a room together, someone's going to get hurt, right? Someone's going to get hurt. So you want to teach your families this hand model so that they can back out of a family conflict and they can look at everybody and just say, let's flip. Right? This is symbolic that I'm going to say stuff I can't take back. This is symbolic that I can't even understand what you're saying. I have to have my cortex on to interpret your words. So if I'm in a family conflict, everyone's got their lids flipped. Here's what I'm hearing. Mwah, 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 mwah. Do you see how that's not going to be conducive or beneficial for anybody? Absolutely no one. And so what you want to do is teach this sign so families will understand if we're in the middle of a family conflict and one person has their lid flipped, everyone just stop. Everyone needs to breathe. Everyone needs to settle. Everyone needs to remind themselves you deserve to have your cortex on because you're valuable and you're worthy, and you deserve to have your thinking cap on because this is hard. This is hard. But don't continue going if anyone has their lid flipped. It makes no sense. It will have no benefit, and you risk flipping all the other lids in the family meeting at that time. Is that, everyone got that? So have that. And a lot of people will say, to our younger kids, a lot of people will say, use your words. How many of you have been working with little kids and you hear that all the time? Use your words. Use your words. Yeah, right? That's a beautiful phrase. I want you to know it is a beautiful phrase. But here's what I want you to know. 6 out of 10 kids have been traumatized. That's what CDC says, 6 out of 10. So here's what you need to know. Use your words. If I'm the kid, if I'm the little kid and you're telling me use my words, my true response, if it was academic, would be, if I only could, I would. I can't get my words out because the atrocious, ugly things that have happened to me don't allow my voice to be heard, don't allow my words to be out here. So when you say use your words, it's equivalent to you telling me to be 6'4" with long blonde hair. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Does that make sense? So instead, when we know we have historical trauma in any of our kids, we got to pull back on the phrase, use your words. Instead, when we're first teaching them not to push, not to bite, not to shove, not to kick, not to spit, whatever the unappreciated behavior is, right? When we're teaching them, you're supposed to be the surrogate cortex, the external cortex, because theirs isn't working so well due to their historical trauma. And so you come up safely in their vicinity, and you mouth the words that you want them to know. And so it might be like this. Paul, I really wish that you would share. It's hard for me when you don't share. If I have the kid right here, I don't want to tell this traumatized kid that doesn't have access to his words to say that. Instead, I'm going to model it every single time. So if we're on the playground for the next 5 weeks and this kid and Paul are having an outburst because Paul doesn't know how to share, and this kid usually knows how to handle it, you don't know how to share, pop. Right? And so we want him to use his words and not his hands. That's great. But in the meantime, you have to be the words. Come up safely next to this kid before they hit, safely next to this kid, and you mouth the words that he needs to know. You mouth them. You're the external surrogate cortex that he does not have access to, because you not sharing is stressful and is frustrating. And as a traumatized kid, I do not have distress tolerance. So you are the external mouth at that time, and you say what you wish the kid could say. Paul, you've had that tetherball for half an hour. Could you share? It hurts me when you don't share. Switch it up every single day, and eventually this kid will steal your words. Win-win. He's going to steal your words until he can bring his voice and his words out. But in the meantime, he's going to use words. They just aren't his because he couldn't find them because the cortex isn't on. But he's got yours. You're the external cortex. Does that make sense? So be careful with the use your words. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It means first you have to do some work prior. You do some work prior. So that's your hand model. That's from Dan Siegel. Up here is a YouTube clip. You know, if you gapped out during this, which is okay, sometimes life is hard and your brain is somewhere else, right? You're like, did I leave the stove on? Did I drop my kid off at school? Right? So if your brain is somewhere else, don't worry. I have a number of links here. You would go in and watch Dan Siegel teach you. He would teach you much better than I, the whole brain model. And so that's what that link up there is for. Here's how I like to share it a little bit with students, right? We talk about your flipping of the lid, and the fingers are your upstairs brain, your cortex, right? And then you got your downstairs brain, your emotional center where you don't think before you act, right? And so this whole concept of making good choices cannot happen unless your lid is on. So when I work with families or young kids, we talk about how these big feelings that erupted from the limbic system, these big feelings, right, the yucky ones, that I'm angry, that I'm disappointment, that I'm bitter, that I'm resentful, that I'm distrusting, whatever the feelings are, they deserve to be safely and appropriately hugged. And the only way the limbic system can get hugged is by getting your lid back on, by getting the cortex back on. And so big feelings deserve to get a safe, gentle hug in order to help them. Don't translate that into you going and hugging the child when they have a flipped lid. So that's not what that is. It is an internal thing. Remember, our traumatized individuals that we work with, they have got to learn how to self-soothe. There's an interesting, devastating outcome from people that have been traumatized at the hands of another, right? At the hands of another. People that have been traumatized often believe that they do not have the right to self-soothe. They do not have the right to calm themselves down. And that in reality, being up and escalated and vigilant is really the only state that they can be in. And so many times they do not know how to self-soothe, which is why they often trip into unhealthy distractions. We have to get the message across. You are valuable, you're worthy, and you're important. You have the right to self-soothe. And the first way to start is by saying you got big feelings sometimes that rule the day. And you deserve to have another part of your brain say, shh, it's okay, I got you. I got you. Does that make sense? That's an invite of having the cortex back on. That's an invite. And we've got to be able to share that out. And if you don't get the cortex back on, then all these big feelings from the limbic system, they run awry and they're ruling the day, and you're doing all types of unappreciated behavior that you usually got to pay for later on, right? You got all kinds of consequences later on. You've damaged relationships, whatnot. And so big feelings can sweep us up in just really awful places. And so we want to impress the importance that you have the right to self-soothe and calm. And one way to do that is to teach your cortex, come back on and hug that limbic system, hug those big feelings that are kind of running the day. Do you see all the neuroscience, right? You want to have the neuroscience. You know, there's nothing worse than when I'm talking to an adult that's had a trauma past, and they will describe themselves almost word for word as being bipolar. They will actually say, I have emotions, I'm all over the place. Oh, and then I make these awful decisions, I'm all over the place. And then I ask them, has anybody ever had a chance to attend to your trauma? Well, no, that's kind of irrelevant. Then I'll teach a little bit of science, right? So people who have historical trauma that they haven't had the privilege to attend to, they haven't had the privilege to address, well, guess what? Your trauma memory, that puzzle piece floats up, gets your attention, or implicit memory visits. You're going to be an emotional wreck while you try to dodge and duck and hide from that trauma piece. So that's when you're doing the most outlandish behaviors that many times look like symptoms from bipolar. And then you're going to have times where you settle down And here's when your depressed states come in. You settle down and you look at the carnage that you made when everything went horribly awry. You look at the messes that you created. Well, now you're hitting a very low mood state. You're significantly depressed over all this damage that you've done. And so now do you see how trauma history looks like this? You have the lows of realizing the damage that you've had. Then you have this escalated high emotionality that comes from implicit memory, trauma memory visiting you. Then you have these significant lows when you realize, oh my God, what have I done? I've damaged another relationship. I've done this, I've said this, I've done that. Then you have these other moments. Does this look familiar? So we don't want to move forward and diagnose with bipolar until you've had a chance to identify is there historical trauma. If there is, then we want people to slow down. It doesn't mean that there can't be bipolar. You can have someone that has a double whammy, trauma history and bipolar. So that can happen. But what I want you to know is that you will have adults that will explain their behavior away as bipolar versus realizing you've never had the right to heal and to hug your feelings, your big feelings from your trauma, to hug them away with your cortex. You haven't been taught that. Let's move in that direction first before you start labeling yourself with these other diagnoses. And again, I'm not anti-diagnoses and I'm not pro-diagnoses. I'm for appropriate diagnoses. Are we good on there? So just recognize trauma often plays out like this. And bipolar symptomatology often has a similar rollout. So just slow down. But there's nothing more sad than an adult sitting in your office explaining how they know they have this versus you actually have significant ups and downs due to your unattended trauma. Do you want to do a little work there first? Okay. Unfortunately, with media and how our kids have access to phones and stuff, I have 13, 14, 15-year-olds looking up symptoms from WebMD, and they will often come in and right now 13, 14, 15-year-olds telling me they have bipolar. I said, no, what you have is tinnitus, right? So you got a little tinnitus. And then if they have trauma, then you got a little trauma. It's a perfect mix for having a life like this. Yeah, so we want to get people to breathe and slow down. I ask them when they tell me where they read these symptoms from, WebMD, I go, did you look up anything on how to love yourself? Did you look up anything on how to have a good day? Did you look up anything on how to make a friend? Did you look up anything on how to be kind? Did you look on anything that has any wellness to it? Did you do that? You didn't, then you're not using that phone well. You have got a domestically violent relationship with your own phone, and you carry your domestic violent partner in your back pocket. Yeah, and you pull it out and you let it abuse you and you let it hurt you and you let it harm you. And so let's first develop a healthy relationship with your phone. Why don't we enter in the search engine bar, top 10 ways for a 14-year-old to achieve healthiness, right? Let's look at that. Some of the articles, total bunk. Some of them, awesome. Then I'm going to teach them how to appropriately use the internet, because let there be no worry, they do know how to inappropriately use the internet, right? And so as a provider, somehow squeeze in, how do we use that thing you carry in your pocket? How do we use it in a nonviolent way? How do we use it in a well way? So we talked about this is going to head into some of our other interventions. So the hidden battle, you cannot have the learning brain on with the survival brain. These are going to be versus each other. So this is a fantastic imagery to show your children, especially when they start saying, I'm stupid and I can't do it. If you know there's historical trauma, let them know your brain is actually having survival brain on instead of learning brain. Let's figure out some ways we can get the cortex back on so we get you into learning brain, right? So just a nice, gentle. So the first thing that you want to do is breathing. It sounds so ridiculous, but here's what we know. When someone is in survival brain, we have evidence that they are not breathing correctly. They are not breathing in the most nourishing ways or nurturing ways. As a matter of fact, traumatized kids, after you get to work with a lot of traumatized kids, you can actually walk into a classroom and you can catch a number of your trauma kids because you see their shoulders go up when they breathe. Do you know your shoulders are not supposed to go up with you breathe? When you breathe properly, your belly comes out. It's an impregnated breath. You breathe out. You can actually stand in the back of the classroom and you can see shoulders up. That means you're not truly getting a deep breath that is cleansing and that is exhaustive when it leaves. And instead, you're having short, shallow breaths, which, by the way, keep the amygdala's attention, because the amygdala is trying to figure out, are you in danger? Is someone cutting your breath off? Is something, what's happening here? So you're keeping the amygdala a little bit hot right now. So the very first thing you want to do is teach breathing. You want to get in there, and there's lots of ways to teach breathing. You do not have to be an expert. Let someone else be the expert. Let a book be the expert. This is a fantastic book, My Magic Breath. Teach this when things are calm. Therefore, when you're meeting with that child and they're escalated, hopefully you've already taught this, and they're escalated, you just look at them, right? You hold up this, you know their lid is flipped, and then you take a deep breath. Their brain will hook it all together because there's already neural hooks. You're letting them know brain is flipped, so it would look like this. If Lenora was my client and I'm at school and she's been escalated or whatnot, just from the back of the room, I'm gonna look at her, I'm gonna hold this up. Her mirror neurons will fire. Remember, mirror neurons, monkey see, monkey do neurons. If I breathe exaggerated enough times, her mirror neurons will fire, and before you know it, she's gonna start taking these deep belly breaths. Win-win, that's what you want. But you're giving her another cue, which is, you know and I know, your lid's flipped. And then I'm just gonna immediately, I don't even have to say anything to her. I don't even have to say anything. I'm just gonna show these breaths. The students that I work with will know that I typically do this, right? So I'll show my arms going in and out, and you can actually regulate someone from across the room. But again, give a neural hook, then start doing it. Family units. A lot of times when I'm working with families, we teach everyone that. You know you've won when an adult, a parent in the family meeting does this and then does a belly breath. Then you know they've clearly indicated their lid is flipped, they're taking a deep breath to come back where they need to be. Does that make sense? So be able to roll out breathing. These are just some videos. You would, some websites, you look at them up on yourself. You got therapistaid.com. It has breathing videos, breathing worksheets. Then down here, you got Sesame Street. You type in the belly breath with Elmo. You can show this with little kids, and it shows a proper belly breath. It even mentions soft. You have to tell your kids that you're teaching a belly breath that it must be soft. And here's why. Trauma kids only want to please because they don't please very often. And so they only want to please. And so you come in and you say, we're going to teach breathing. And they're like, yeah, something I can finally do, right? And then so you're showing them breaths, and they're doing hard belly breaths to the point where they're extending their abdomen. They're actually feeling pain. So you have to make sure you say, belly breathing is about soft belly breaths. There should be no pain or discomfort. So keep in mind, if you're teaching in a group, it'll be all your trauma kids that are hurting themselves. Slow it down. Soft belly breath, should be no pain, no harm while you're doing this. If you have a little bit of an older kid, 11 and 12, go up here to pbs.org, breathing exercises, and again, worksheets that go to it. And there are a number of websites out there. You got Go Noodle website, you got Go Zen website, some fantastic websites where there are already created videos. You do not have to be the belly breather expert of the world. You simply have to create a safe environment where you can all watch it together. So that's your first strategy. You really want that cortex back on. So allow people to breathe and settle down and expend that cortisol and adrenaline. That's what you want. Now, the next piece that you're going to do after you've got breathing on the scene is we're rolling into feeling work. And here's what we know about our traumatized individuals. It is usually a combination of uncomfortable, harmful feelings that keep them from being able to anchor and settle. So that means if there's been trauma in a person's history, you're doing a lot of feeling work. I mean, all the time, multiple sessions, feeling work over feeling work over feeling work over feeling work. And so one way that you're going to start off is let people know there are a plethora of feelings. Most families that have been through trauma usually think the feelings are either mad, sad, or angry. Well, some of those are interchangeable. Really, there's a plethora of them. So start by doing your feeling work by talking about there's so many feelings out there. And what we know is that sometimes identifying our feelings really can help things. When we talk about enhancing resiliency, one of the top resiliency skills, let me start that sentence over with this. We used to once think that everyone was born with a certain level of resiliency, right? That like, oh, you're lucky, you're really highly resilient. Oh, you're not so much, you're not so resilient. But in reality, the new research through the Resilience National Database lets us know you can actually train certain practices and certain skills that will enhance your resiliency. And so it's a 21 questionnaire to really identify where your resiliency level is. And then you teach certain skill sets. They go back and take the same exam again. And what you can see is that resiliency is actually enhanced. And so how this ties into feeling work. Highly resilient people are able to do this. They can identify their primary emotions, emotions that are experienced first. They can identify them. And number two, they can express them out appropriately. That is a characteristic of highly resilient people. So if you want to increase resiliency, especially with your traumatized individuals, if you want to enhance resiliency, you're going to do feeling work, teach them how to identify their feelings, and then teach them how to express them out to others. That's a resiliency characteristic. And a theory that helps us is this whole, that's Dan Siegel, by the way, this concept of name it to tame it. So once again, if we go to the brain model, right, we go to the hand model of the brain, we have theories that are allowing us to recognize the cortex, when it names the feeling from the feeling center of the brain, the limbic system, when it can name what feeling you're having, it helps get your lid back on. That's the concept of name it to tame it. If you're having feelings, you're having emotions, and you're not able to identify what they truly are, right, then you have a hard time taming it. And they usually can run amok and actually rule the day. What we have to do is we have to train individuals, families, and children, the cortex, if you can get it to name your primary emotion, the emotions that are coming up for you in your limbic system, whatever you're feeling, name it to tame it. Then you have a regulated, integrated brain versus a dysregulated brain. You want your lid back on. So the closer we can get them to identify their true emotions, because usually when people flip their lid, they say this, so what kind of feeling is going on? Oh, well, I'm angry. Anger is a secondary emotion. You need them to identify their primary emotion. Anger is a secondary, secondary emotions are never born on their own. They always come from somewhere else. Anger is one of those emotions that is not born on its own. It came from a primary emotion. Highly resilient people, when they can get in and identify their primary emotions, they actually do better in life. They can actually meet their emotional needs at a higher rate because they can go back and identify the emotion that came before the anger. So anger is a secondary emotion. So from here on out, when your family say they're angry or that they feel angry, you hear them out and validate that. And then you go right on into psychoeducation and say, hey, you want to know something kind of interesting? Anger is a secondary emotion, meaning it was born from somewhere. It was born from a primary emotion. Then bring out the most dull, boring feeling sheet in the world, right? Million words on here. And ask, I'm just wondering where your anger came from today. Because by the way, you can have anger again tomorrow, came from a different set of primary emotions. And so just have them go on and identify, just circle two. There are two emotions that really are giving birth to your anger right here and now. And research shows when you do that, you're naming it to tame it. You're going to have someone breathe, settle, and calm. Because if you say you're angry, there's not much we can do with that, right? But primary emotions are where we need to go. That's the very general feeling work that we all need to be doing out there. So teach primary emotions. Get in there and teach primary emotions. Educate over and over and over. Anger is a secondary emotion. Get to the primary emotion, and you will help tame it. You will help settle it, and you will help someone recover and heal. That's what we need to do. So this is just naming to tame it. If your thinking part can name the emotion, it can actually calm down the feeling part. Name it to tame it. And you all try it. The next time you're in the car and you're driving and, you know, it's chaotic and someone's doing some awful driving like you all do in California, you know, that's kind of happening and you're so angry, right? You're just so angry. Take a big impregnated belly breath, right? Big belly breath. And go, wait a minute, Jen kind of ruined my life for me. Anger's a secondary emotion. What are the primary emotions? Go in and identify the primary emotions. You will name it to tame it, and you'll have a sense of calmness. When you're at work with someone and things aren't going well and you're angry with that coworker, go to your room, not your room, go to your office. Go to your room, go to your office, pull out the feeling sheet for you, right? And go, what am I really feeling? What are my primary emotions? When you can identify that, you should have a sense of calmness. And by the way, then you can communicate. When you come at someone with anger, can't really do that. But instead, if I came at my colleague and I said, hey, I'm kind of feeling, well, whenever we're working on a case together, Paul, I'm feeling a little bit of humiliation and a little disrespect from you. And I wonder if we can talk about that. That's going to go a lot different versus me coming at him with my secondary emotion. Paul, when I work with you, I'm just angry as hell. We got nowhere to go with that. And so we want to go back to primary emotions, feeling kind of taken advantage of, or, you know, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling worried, whatnot. So primary emotions are where you want to go to. And this is just a nice little kind of cheat sheet. Everyone sees the anger iceberg, right? Everyone sees this everywhere. It's in counseling offices all over the world. I wish that we could slow ourselves down and then actually use it appropriately, right? And so keep in mind, the anger iceberg is to let us know that what we typically show people is anger. So if Paul's my colleague, I typically show him anger because as a human species, that's how we're built. I'm going to show you anger because to go in and identify primary emotions is one of vulnerability. You're really vulnerable when you do that. And so we're not necessarily built like that. Remember, as a species, we're built to survive, 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 survive. But we're not in historical times anymore. We don't have to survive in the same way. We are advanced and we have to evolve. And so I now need to come at my colleague Paul by identifying what my primary emotions were. And so it's about getting people to look below the water. Anger is what we show people because that's in our evolutionary makeup. Down here, if we want to settle things, calm things, heal things, recover from things, you must be able to go deeper underneath the water, identify your primary emotions. Then you can speak to your primary emotions. You can actually begin the healing process only if you've identified your primary emotions. So this, if you're doing family meetings, this should be at every family meeting. The moment you have a student or a parent escalating, a child or a parent escalating, pull out the iceberg, right? And they're going to have a neural hook because you already introduced them. They already know it. And they're going to recognize I'm showing everyone my anger. Let me pause, take a breath, let me go deep and go, here's really what I'm feeling. I'm feeling nervous and I'm feeling a little bit rejected. Well, now everyone can talk about that. Now we can talk. That's a lot easier to talk about other than mom's anger, other than pop's anger, other than the foster parents' anger. Let's go a little bit deeper, and now we can talk about primary emotions. So just pull it out. Introduce it in a calm state. Don't wait for like people to be throwing punches and then you're running around with your anger iceberg, right? So when everything's calm, you talk about the anger iceberg, you educate them on it, you normalize it, you explain the brain science, right? You talk about that. Then when things go awry, bring it out. It's a neural hook. They will remember, they know knowledge about this, they have information about this, and it will be linked to every other intervention that you've rolled out, such as breathing. There have been times where I've been in a family meeting. I actually had a couple break out in a pillow fight in my office. It was the strangest thing. Kind of freaked me out a little bit. I was like, I don't know where this is going to go, and I don't know if I should interrupt. And so I just held up the anger iceberg. I kid you not. And we'd already talked about it a couple times. I just held it up, and it served as a neural hook, as evidenced by this. Both of them looked, and then I could see them just do the belly breath. They went to the intervention they knew. So again, it serves as a neural hook. This education leads to other education interventions you've rolled out. Okay? All right. Feelings. So be able to do feeling work around this. You have to let all of your clients know. Feelings come and go. Feelings are not built to last. They're actually not built like that at all. And here's the easiest way to prove it. And I love doing this with high school students because they're really hard to reach. So if you're working with teens that have historical trauma and then sometimes have high emotionality and they get lost and caught up in it. And here's how you often know. You'll hear the word drama quite often that other people go, oh, you got so-and-so, so drama. Oh, you have so-and-so, oh, she's so drama. That often is code word for, oh, they're so hurt. So anytime you hear drama in a way to describe one of your clients, anytime you hear that from the parents, from the foster parents, from the school, remind yourself that, they're so hurt. Change out the word for drama. And by the way, even non-traumatized teens can be drama because it hurts to be a teen. That's a whole separate training, understanding the adolescent brain changes. There is pruning, literally cutting off and shaving off your synapses in your brain. It leaves you in high emotionality status, which is why teens are an absolute nightmare and often come across as drama. They are literally aching and hurting from being a teen. Does that make sense? From being a teen. So just put that into perspective. Natural for a teen state to hurt and to ache and to have high emotionality. Now add trauma, that's like pouring gasoline onto a fire. They're more hurting, more experiencing this high emotionality they can't make sense out of. So be able to teach every client that you know, feelings are not built to last. Feelings are not built to last. And you can prove it, like I said, with teens, here's how I prove it. I ask them, anybody here ever feel, I bring up that boring feeling chart, right? And we'll circle a couple of them and I'll ask, anybody here ever feel sadness? They shake their head. Well, let me do it to you. Anybody here ever feel sad at any time in their life? Any time in their life? Yeah. Did it last forever? No. Anybody here ever feel, oh, here we go. Anybody here ever feel disrespected any time in their life? Ever feel disrespected? Yeah. Did it last forever? No. Let's flip it. Anybody here ever feel joy? You ever feel joy and excited and giddiness at any time in your life? Did it last forever? Darn it. No, it didn't. Because feelings are not built to last. Feelings are not built to last. Here's why you need to teach that, especially to our traumatized children. They will be in a negative emotional mood state and believe that it will not end. Therefore, they can rationalize the right to hurt themselves or the right to hurt someone else. They can rationalize why I should kill myself, or they can rationalize why all of you deserve to die. We have to let people know your mood states do not last forever. They are not built like that. So we need to keep attention to them. We need to see which ones visit more often, right? And kind of get on that. But mood states are not built to last forever. And so this is a fantastic intervention. It's called urge surfing. This mindfulness skill. Not only coping with urges, but coping with negative emotional mood states, recognizing they will not last forever. So when you're in them, you don't make a decision to do anything. When you're in those throes of negative emotional mood state, you don't move forward and make the decision to hurt yourself or hurt another person or to ingest something that you shouldn't ingest. You don't make the decision to do that. A really fun activity that's related to this is I'll take in teen group, I'll take a blank piece of paper just like this, and I'll set them all down on the floor. And then I have my teens stand on it, right? So everyone, you can picture standing on this, a little bit difficult, but doable. So I've got all these teens standing on this piece of paper. And then what I do is I have them lift one leg up. So now they're on it with one leg. So it's a little harder, right? A little bit harder. Then what I will do is I will ask the most basic question. I'll ask some basic math question. You know, what's 4 times 8? Or what's 4 times 4? I'll ask it a question that's below their grade level, so I know they typically would get it. So they're all standing on a paper, right? And then I walk around and I gently shove them while they're balanced on one foot on the paper. And then I ask them the question, what's 4 times 6? What's 4 times 6? What's 4 times 6? They cannot answer that question because they are under stress, standing on a paper, one leg, while being shoved. Well, that's the epitome of life. Do not ride a wave out in the ocean and think that you can answer questions about, should I hurt myself? Should I not hurt myself? Should I hurt someone else? Should I not? Should I cut today? Should I not cut today? Should I smoke today? Should I not? Don't make any decisions. You can't even answer 4 times 6 with this little stress here. So when life is stressful, do not make a decision to hurt yourself or to hurt another person. And by the way, where do all waves end up? On shore, right? On shore. Wait until you get on shore, get your feet planted, right? Ask for assistance, and then we'll talk about what we should do. So when I let them off their piece of paper with one foot, right? I say, now everyone put your foot down. Everyone put your foot down. Everyone take a deep breath, and it just solidifies my breathing technique I taught them earlier. Everyone take a deep breath. Everyone settle. Everyone calm. Now let me ask you, what's 4 times 6? Then they're able to answer. Don't answer questions or make decisions when you're in high emotionality and you're under stress. You will not make good choices. Our traumatized students need to know that. Our traumatized clients need to know that because they make decisions to harm themselves and to harm others when everything is going awry and the amygdala is on fire. So this is just one activity to slow everything down. Get onto shore, find out who your support people are, and don't make a decision in this moment. I'm going to walk you through one last, due to time, I'm going to walk you through one last intervention. This intervention actually comes from Dr. Rick Hansen. He wrote this book with a number of other books, Hardwiring Happiness. And it's a fantastic, he's got TED Talks and whatnot, just phenomenal. And before I go forward on this, let me yell this out. If you're doing work with traumatized individuals, let me yell out a couple of authors so you can write them down. You should have books from Rick Hansen. You should have books from Russ Harris. He wrote Acceptance Commitment Therapy, The Happiness Trap. You should have information from Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F. You should have books from Dan Siegel, who I've mentioned multiple times here. You should also have books from Brene Brown. Her research is heavy into shame. You will not find one traumatized brain that is not cloaked in shame. Those are your authors you should lean on if you're doing trauma work. You got your Kristen Neff, your Russ Harris, your Rick Hansen, your Dan Siegel, and your Brene Brown. That should be your library if you're going to be doing this work. Lots of good stuff to read. So I'm going to show you one activity, and this is what we'll end and we'll break for lunch with. So let's, and it's risky. I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit risky. So here's what I want you to do. You're actually going to, if you have a phone, you're going to pull out your phone. I know, risky, I lost y'all. Stay with me. What you're going to do is you're going to pull out your phone and go to your photo reel. If you don't have a phone, I love you, all right? If you don't have a phone, you can do it in your brain. But if you have a phone, I want you to go to your photo reel, and what you're going to do is you're going to scroll. You're going to find some picture where you, it's either a picture that you're in or not in, where it's a time in which everything was going well. You were nurtured. The person in the picture is very loving towards you, or was loving. It can also be a picture of someone that's no longer with us. And so it might be a day. It might be a picture out. Maybe it's a picture of something in the front yard, but you know you and your grandma were sitting on the porch, whatnot. Find a picture where you know you were loved and cared for and nourished. Take a few moments, find that picture, and then I'll walk you through the exercise moment. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Kathy. All right, about one more minute. Hopefully Merced and in Fresno, you're finding some type of picture. And if you are not using your phone, pull it up in your own mind or memory, an image. Okay. All right, if you haven't found one on your phone, then you're lost in the deep tunnel of Facebook or wherever else. And so just walk through the exercise in general with me. So have that picture up. Bring to mind someone that cares for you. Hopefully it was in the picture. That's what you're supposed to be doing. It's a good experience of how you were feeling cared for. And then take that idea or image, whatever that image is, right, and let it grow. Think about how you were nurtured in that moment. Think about how it felt in that moment. You can even go through the 5 senses. What was the weather like on that day? Was it humid? Was it dry? Was it sunny? Was it rainy? If you're out at dinner with someone, think about the dinner. How did that dinner go? What were the tastes like, right? What was that all like? All of your senses, right? And being with that person, and it could be a pet as well, right? For some of you, we prefer animals over people, and there are reasons for that. So you allow yourself to let that image, that memory, that experience grow. Think of as many senses as you can through the picture that you're looking at. If you're holding your granddaughter, think about how she smelled. Think about how it felt that day, whatever it was. So get all that in there. Let it grow. Are you letting it grow? Let it grow. Think about everything you can within that picture. Move from concept to experience, right? Allowing it to become a feeling now, right? A feeling. So you thought about all the 5 senses, but now a feeling. What were you feeling on that day, in that restaurant, holding that kid, sitting on the front porch, whatever it was? What are the feelings that came up on that day, on that very day? Feeling of happiness, joy, content, feeling settled. What were those feelings? Let those evolve. Let those grow. Good, good. Absorb it all. Just absorb that experience in there. Right, right. Good. All right, now let's go ahead and come on out. Would someone mind sharing in this room? Could someone mind sharing? You don't have to share the picture. If you could, but describe it really quick, what's going on, the event, and then walk us through the experience and the feeling. Anyone? Anyone? You don't want to? Oh, please. Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
So y'all remember this, that this microphone is not for the room, it's for our online folks, right? So
just describe the picture. Okay, so I'm with my 2 little nieces. It was a hot summer day. We're having a pool party, and just the feelings of love, you know, I hadn't seen them in a while. They live out in Sacramento, so I don't get to see them that often as I would like. And so this picture just really brings out the love. They're hugging me, and their smiles are super bright. They're happy. All three of us are happy, and we're just glad to be together there and having a fun time.
Excellent, excellent. So Greg, right now, what are some of the feelings that you're experiencing? You're sharing the story with us and you're talking about it. Tell me maybe what you're feeling right now, thinking about it.
Just love, pride, joy of having them in my life. They really bring joy to me just talking about them and thinking about them and how proud I am of them, of everything that they do, and so yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. Thank you. So here's the beauty of this activity. We typically do not do this. We typically do not pull a picture up where we're being nurtured and nourished. There's a loving experience. There's a great experience. We typically do not do this. First of all, we have really hectic, busy lives. We also don't use photos healthily. Most of us will look at photos and go, oh my God, why was I wearing that? Why didn't anybody tell me my hair looked like that? That's usually what we do. We're very abusive when we look at photos. And so we already have a brain that is trained to identify the negative. That's in our species. As a species, we're supposed to see the negative, right? Because it helped us survive. If you recognize this is dangerous, I need to stay away from it. If you recognize, oh my gosh, there's a danger here, I need to stay away from that. Our brain is already wired like that. It's called negativity bias. It works well, which is why we're still in a species that is alive. We are no longer in these really dangerous tar pit times where animals are chasing us and trying to eat us. So what we need to do is we need to exercise out another part of the brain. And the part of the brain is exercising out the neural pathways that allow us to feel calm and nurtured and settled. And so you want to be able to go in and find a picture. Now, this is a picture of my 12-year-old. This is a picture, he's 14 now. So this is when he was 12, but I still use this picture to this day to do this experience. You're supposed to use it during difficult times. Who has more difficult times, neurotypical or non-neurotypical? Trauma brain or non-trauma brain? Trauma brain have more difficult times. You have to teach them an opportunity to create an image in which they can douse themselves in, because their brain already douses themselves in those trauma puzzle pieces floating around in their brain. What we have to do is we have to create some type of picture where they can go in and go, wow, what was that day like? This is my son and I playing disc golf. The weather was humid. It was hot. He was exceptionally goofy that day. It allowed me to be goofy. We were silly. I felt really nurtured. I felt loved. I could tell he felt loved and he felt nurtured. So when it says use during difficult times, he's 14 now. I assure you I do it every day. Yeah, right, because that's difficult. Really difficult raising a teen. And so you often have to go back and exercise the neural pathway that allows you to be remembered, allows you to remember these times in which someone else loved you. Because remember, oxytocin was damaged in trauma brain, and oxytocin lets you know you're lovable, you can give love, you can receive love. So during our most difficult times, we go all the way back to the belief that we're not lovable, that we can't give love, we can't receive love. This is from the book Hardwiring Happiness. It is not saying that you need to be in a state of happiness your entire life, because what we know about feelings is it doesn't work like that. But what it is saying is that during difficult times, do activities that allow you to be nurtured and nourished. Now, with some of your kids that are traumatized, you don't necessarily want to bring up a photo album because you have no idea what they're going to bring up. Instead, you do it old-fashioned style and have them draw a day that felt good, a day where they felt loved, a day where someone was in that picture where they felt nurtured and cared for. Have them draw the picture so they have a little bit more control over it, right? And then you have them walk you through that picture. Ask them, how did it smell? How did it feel? How did it taste? What was going on? And then if the picture has no trauma triggers, then that is a picture they can take a picture of if they have a cell phone and they keep it somewhere in their photo book. Then you teach them, on occasion, I want you to pull this photo up and immerse yourself in the moment in which you felt nurtured and nourished. Why do I want you to do that? Because you deserve serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, because you're worthy, you're valuable, and you're lovable. Does that make sense? All right, we'll break for lunch. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, we good? Okay. Welcome back. Hope you all had a great lunch, nice break, time to get away and get yourself nourished, had some good grub. Welcome back to all of our partners in Merced County and Fresno County too. So we're changing things up a little bit. Originally, we were going to jump right into questions and answers with Jen, but she's got a few more things that she wants to share with us. And so we're absolutely going to create time for that. We're still going to have question and answer time after she's done. And then after that, we're going to get connected and have some conversations about what we heard and some thoughts that we might have moving forward together. So with that, I'm going to invite Jen back up for part 2. Thanks, Jen.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Fresno and Merced can hear me? Okay, perfect. So we had ended on this one, right? To remember to use rewiring for hardness from Dr. Rick Hansen, using that intervention, teaching that intervention to our families that we work with, but also using it for yourself, right? Because this is difficult work that you do. So you should have a picture or two that you just sit in your car once in a while in a parking lot after a really rough family visit, after a really rough school visit, after a really rough day, and you go directly to that picture, you immerse yourself in it, you allow some of those feel-good neurotransmitters to be released so that you can do some healing and recovery from some of the hard work that you do. So it's for you as well. Remember, if you use it, you see the benefit of it, it'll show that you'll be able to teach it a little bit more clearer to the clients that you're working with. But use it for yourself, teach it to your clients. So everything that we've gone over in regards to understanding the trauma brain is really about sharing out the science, how the brain works, how different regions of the brain speak to each other, and how different regions of the brain become escalated, and how certain regions of the brain actually drop off and don't serve us well under times of stress or difficult times. So what we want to do is we want to normalize that difficult times are a part of life, right? Rather there's been trauma in the historical record or not. Difficult times are a part of life. We never want to buy into the fact that we should simply give up because there's difficult times. We want to learn all kinds of skills and interventions and practices that will help us maneuver and navigate through the difficult times. But in regards to our children that we're working with and our families that we're working with that do have historical trauma, you still want to normalize that life does have difficult times, right? And some of the difficulty comes from misinterpretation. All of us at times misinterpret events and situations. All of us do, whether we have trauma or not. It's just that now you're explaining to the traumatized individual, you might have a higher rate of misinterpretations, misunderstandings, again, because of how the brain reacted and was affected by trauma. So you want to be able to explain that. But again, normalize, difficult times are a part of life. We're going to learn some ways to handle it. Difficult times can come just because a number of variables lined up in a way that made it a difficult day. But specifically for our traumatized individuals, difficult times sometimes are a creation of how we see the world, a creation of how we're misinterpreting the world, how we're misinterpreting others. So you want to be able to clarify that, and I've given you a number of ways to do that, showing the brain, showing the in reality view, Bernstein picture versus the trauma view, Bernstein picture. So we want to let people know that some people misinterpret more than others. Those people that misinterpret more than others typically have a lot of trauma puzzle pieces floating around on that survival pathway in the brain. Really make sure you teach this. Then we can figure out, hey, how do we move forward and handle these interpretations? Just remember, reminding people there are all kinds of reasons for misinterpretations, trauma being one of them. Trauma being one of them. Then we can move into kind of giving name to them, right? So if trauma is one, again, I don't use trauma word when I'm working with clients, I use unpleasant past experiences. But realize there's other things that can allow misinterpretation too. Having someone with a generalized anxiety disorder, it activates the same survival pathway that the trauma effect activates. It just doesn't have the trauma puzzle pieces on that pathway. And still, it usually has your worries, your fears of the future. Instead, they are operating right there on that survival pathway, believing that you have to be paying attention to all these anxiety-ridden, worrisome events, or else you're not going to make it out. And so for some that have generalized anxiety disorder, guess what? They lose out on their cortex once in a while, and they have to bring their lid and get it back on tight again, just like others do. Some people might not have an actual diagnosable anxiety disorder, might not be at a level of generalized anxiety disorder, but they just have been maybe raised around someone that has a lot of worries. And so now you're working with a child that has a lot of worries. Again, doesn't necessarily meet the criteria for generalized anxiety disorder, but have more worries than the average individual. They will often misinterpret things too, because their worries actually get involved in their thought process. And so the worries penetrate it and invade their thought process. And so they don't have a typical A to Z thought process. Instead, they have an A, worrisome thought, B, worrisome thought, C, worrisome thought, all the way to Z. And so their worrisome thoughts just kind of invade their thought process. And so that will lead to misinterpretations too. And then current environmental factors that maybe are not so kind, maybe are significantly stressful. Those can lead to all kinds of misinterpretations. Have you ever had, a really rough day at home? It's been a rough morning. You're on the kids, and the kids and you are having a little argument. Everyone's escalated, everyone's heightened, and then you're getting everyone in the car and you're dropping them off. And as the parent, you go to work, and what you usually do, by the way, is you ruminate over and over about, oh my gosh, that was horrible. And your kid's already forgotten it, by the way. Your kid's already in second period, doesn't even remember how rough the day was. But you're replaying that rough morning over and over and over. That then affects how you handle your colleagues at work. That affects your productivity at work. That affects how well your lunch stays with you at work. That affects everything. And so its effects can also cause misinterpretation. I can be at work and now I'm misinterpreting Paul, right? I'm misinterpreting everybody else I'm working with because I have this leftover struggle from the morning time. So just realize there are lots of reasons for misinterpretation. When I work with kids that have been traumatized or entire family units that have experienced trauma, I share with them all of these. They're able to identify pretty openly because, number one, they know that I'm working with them on trauma. They're able to identify, our reasons for kind of the consistent misinterpretations are due to us having unpleasant experiences in our past. But when I take time to show how other people sometimes have the same experience, they're able to go, so there's lots of reasons as to why the brain does what it does. Then they're understanding the science. You want them to understand the neuroscience behind it. So when you have these conversations helping people understand difficult times happen, but in reality, sometimes more difficult times happen due to your misinterpretations. Next point, misinterpretation can happen in a lot of ways. But for sure, trauma brain has a lot of misinterpretations. And so what you end up with is kind of this fire, the amygdala, right? The alarm center is like a volcano. And that's usually how I teach young children. It's like a volcano. And it constantly is at a rumble. It constantly has some lava spewing out all over, which leaves people in a really hot spot. Leaves people kind of burning down relationships. Leaves people kind of having huge hot messes to clean up. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to cool down the amygdala. So after we've explained everything that we've gone over neuroscience-wise, and kids have a good grasp, hey, that's what my amygdala is doing, and honestly, it shouldn't be doing it. I need to figure out a way to keep it calm and keep it cool and get my brain working again. Then we're going to introduce items that they can think about that can serve as a cooling agent. So for my really young kids where we're working on recovering from trauma, we talk about what would cool down, what would calm down that hot, fiery volcano in the brain that often is going off due to misinterpretations. What would calm that down? And then I take it all the way back to the very beginning. Why do you want to calm that amygdala down? Here's when I know a kid is getting and grasping everything I've been through. They're able to look at me and say, because I deserve to have my thinking cap on, and my cortex is the thinking cap. I deserve to have it on. I deserve to be working through my life, my day, with my thinking cap versus my volcano. Can you kind of hear that? So if you do the science and you explain it, they're going to be able to answer these large questions. So for my young kids, I ask, how would we calm down a hot, fiery amygdala? How would we calm down a hot, fiery volcano? And I have them think of as many images as we can do. Now with young kids, it's really easy because they're okay still to draw. And so they might draw down. I'll ask, draw as many cold objects that would help cool down. Here's why you're doing that. When a child can conceptualize that the amygdala is a hot volcano, when they can conceptualize that the cortex, if I can get the cortex back on, it has a cooling effect and a calming effect. When they can conceptualize it, then they can synthesize and add and adopt the interventions that we're rolling out. But they first have to conceptualize what is going on. So we have to have conceptualization that I struggle with misinterpretation, which sets my volcano off, and I deserve more, and I deserve better. And so how do I do that? I got to get my lid back on. I got to get Captain Cortex in here. I got to get the cooling agent in here to settle things down. That's when you know there's a conceptualization. Then we can move to adoption. How do I adopt certain practices? So for my young kids, I'll have them draw as many cooling agents, and we'll talk about it the whole time, right? They're drawing cold things I've never even thought of. They're drawing Slurpees. They're drawing ice creams, snow cones. Now, a little bit with my older kids, if they already are involved in a computer class, I'll typically have them look for images. But again, at a school site where you have a protected internet access. And then what they'll do is they'll bring up an internet kind of collage, and we'll create that together. And so this is actually from a 12-year-old, went onto a site and was able to pull these up. And so what he pulled up, ice cubes, a cold running stream. And you see all those things there. And so it allows me to go back and talk about the science. If we can get a cooling agent on the scene and your amygdala settles down, how would your life be different? Oh, well, my life would be different because my cortex would be engaged, right? My smart brain would be engaged, not my hot emotional volcano. I deserve to have my cooling brain on. This is just a kind of a pathway to talk about that and to have some creativity. Remember, anytime you can have movement and have some kind of kinetic element to your treatment sessions, some time of kinetic activity to your time together with your client and your family, the learning is going to go a lot farther. There's going to be different ways that it can anchor in. You can't just have this straight dyad, right? You can't just be talking back and forth and back and forth. Bring an activity to it. And this is one way to bring an activity to it. Then a lot of times I'll push on to this activity. So you can actually get printouts off the internet for free that look like a comic book printout. You know, they'll have your little boxes, and then you can fill it in. So a lot of times I will have a child pick an incident. It's almost always the incident that caused them to be referred to me in the first place. So if a school has asked me to come in, it's been because Johnny threw a book, Johnny pushed someone down, Johnny cussed the teacher out and spit on him on the way out the door. It's always some appreciated behavior, right? And so I will put that in comic strip form. You know, hey, I hear your words telling me about what happened on that day. Let's kind of break the story up as much as we can, right? And so box A, they're going to be drawing out like what happened. You know, I went to the cafeteria. Next box, well, what happened? Well, I got my tray. Well, next box, you know, what happened? Well, I was walking back to my table to eat it. Next box, what happened? I don't know. I just slipped and slid, and stuff flew off my tray. And next box, what happened? Well, kids laughed. Next box, what happened? I picked up the tray and I chucked it across the cafeteria. Next box, what happened? The tray actually connected in the head of the person I wanted it to, so I have good aim. Next box, right? All right. And so what we have is this whole scenario, right? And then eventually we got the box. Well, what happened now? Well, I got detention. Well, what now? Well, now I got to come see you every Thursday at 2 o'clock before science class. Oh, okay. Right. Well, what happened? Well, my mom was all over me. It was awful. Blah, 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 blah. Right. So now we have this entire comic strip laid out. Then we have the opportunity to ask a question. If Captain Cortex was on the scene, right? If your smart brain was on the scene, how would this have all gone different? And so I'll have them put an X where they need additional boxes to change the story. Then we just pull out another comic strip, blank comic strip, and we start it all over. And so what happened? I went to the cafeteria. What happened? I got my food. What happened? I was walking back to my table. What happened? Well, I slipped and people laughed. What happened if Captain Cortex arrived right where you put the X? How would this have gone down differently, right? And then they're able to say, well, I might not have taken it so hard when people laughed. Captain Cortex might have just said, hey, get out. Someone else can pick it up, but don't throw it. Whatever you do, don't throw it. Captain Cortex would have helped me out and told me, don't throw the tray, right? Captain Cortex might have said, breathe. People fall all the time. Have you seen the klutz in your classroom? Like all the time. Captain Cortex could have been there for me. Captain Cortex could have kept me calm, but instead my volcano went off and I slung that tray harder than anything. conk someone in the head. But now we've got all these little stories, these little boxes, I'm sorry, about how things might have been different had Captain Cortex been on the scene. Really what you're doing is you're letting them know that the entire storyline would have gone different. The entire event would have gone different if you were able to do something to breathe, calm yourself down, get your lid back on. Things would have been different. Then I have them take them all the way to the very end of the comic strip. How would things be different now? Well, I wouldn't have had detention. I also wouldn't have had to write that apology letter. All right. I also wouldn't have got chewed out by my mom. I probably also wouldn't have had to seen you, right? I wouldn't have had the referral. I wouldn't have had 2 case managers come visit me every other week now, whatever it may be. So they can see the storyline would have been different the more that Captain Cortex was on the scene. So it's not about shaming. It's not about shaming and say, oh, you should have done it different. Instead, it's about empowerment. You deserve to have Captain Cortex around when you need it. You've got to do certain things to invite and solicit and get Captain Cortex's attention so that they are there with you. It's about realizing I am worthy to have my cortex working with me and not vacating and leaving. Does that make sense? So these are activities that when you get to this intervention, you are basically teaching consequential thinking after you've taught neuroscience. Now, consequential thinking makes more sense. How do I interrupt this typical comic book story? How do I interrupt it? By one thing, getting my lid back on. By one thing, getting my Captain Cortex more involved. How do I change some of the things that happen to me over and over and over again, right? How I throw this, I hit that, I do this, I do that. How do I change some of that? And again, it's not in a shaming way. It's in an empowering way. You are deserving and worthy to have that cortex online, that thinking cap. Life is easier with your thinking cap on. So the first comic book strip is how difficult life is when you don't have your thinking cap on. Then after you're done with the second comic book strip, that's an example of how it is with your thinking cap on. Any student is going to be able to step back and say, I want more of that. I want more of life with my thinking strip on. In a very advanced comic book activity, you're going to have a third one where you actually have boxes written out in the story where it is showing the practices that they're doing. So if you look at that very advanced, and again, you fill your client out to see if they can do it, but in the very advanced form, we're going to read the comic book strip like this. Box, I went to the cafeteria. Second box, got my tray. Third box, heading back to the table. Next box, stripped. Next box, people were laughing at me. Next box, all of a sudden you're going to see all these interventions. This box right here, the child has actually drawn belly, hand on belly. So I know they're doing deep breathing. The next box, this kid has actually drawn them pondering, looking up, thinking about a time in which they were cared for or loved for or whatever it may be. This box here is actually the kid standing up looking at the student teacher in the room or the teacher in the room that they know at the cafeteria and looking at them with their hand like this, letting that person know my lid's flipped, please assist, right? And so the boxes in there are actually the ways in which they are soliciting and inviting Captain Cortex back onto the scene. So the more calming and mindfulness skills you've taught a client, that comic book strip can go on for quite a while. You see the difference there? So it's not just sitting across from a client and saying, you need to breathe when times get tough, right? You need to realize you flipped your lid and that's how come you keep messing up, right? It's more than that. It really is this deep ability to conceptualize, then you can synthesize. You can't do it the other way. You can't adopt and synthesize activities into your life unless you have conceptualized them. It goes like this, conceptualization, then you can synthesize, add it, and adopt it into your life. So this is just one way to roll that out. Now if I have, let's take that same child, right? And what we know is that they ruminate and they perseverate on this whole incident that went horrible. Then you're going to want to teach a grounding technique. Here are one of the most basic grounding techniques. Keep in mind there are hundreds of different grounding techniques out there. This is the most basic grounding technique. So I'm going to teach it to you, but then you modify it when you teach it to your students or your families. So some of us hang out in really dangerous areas in our mind, right? Some of us, we dwell over here. We replay traumatic events or unpleasant events. So the kid that I'm talking about, let's say it's 2 weeks in and he's just kind of replayed the event where he tripped and he slipped and everyone laughed. He's replayed it over and over. He replayed slinging the tray and hitting the kid upside the head. He's replayed that over and over and over. You want to train immediately, teach immediately. There's no benefit that can come from replaying unfortunate events. No benefit that can come at all. So instead, we've got to pop out of that. We've got to figure a way to pop out of that. So keep that in mind. So some of you hang out here, unpleasant traumatic events. You replay them over and over and over again. And some of you, you do this. You futuristic worries. You play the what if game. What if this? What if that? What if this? What if I go up for that promotion? I don't actually get it. What if I ask? What if I apply for a master's program? I don't actually get in. What if I get in and I can't really do it? What if I'm actually a horrible writer and I can't complete my thesis? What if this? What if that? What if I don't pay enough attention at work and then I get cut back at work because I'm focused on school? What if? What if? Does it sound familiar? So for some of you, when you play the what if game, it paralyzes you. That's so you end up doing nothing. You don't apply for a promotion. You don't look at another school for a transfer. You don't look at applying for the master's program. You don't look at anything. You actually become paralyzed if you get stuck in the what ifs. So if we're going to be really honest, some of you vacation here and then you vacation here. You actually bounce back and forth, right? I see a lot of heads going on. And then some of you got your favorite destination, either futuristic worries or unpleasant events. What I want you to know is you can't do any healing or living on those ends of the continuum. It's impossible. You can only heal and live if you're in the here and now. Does that make sense? So you cannot live and heal stuck here, and you cannot live and heal stuck there. You have to somehow bring yourself back to the here and now. It is the only place that you can actually live and heal. So one way to do that is a 5-step grounding technique. It's very simple, very easy, but everyone should know it. So here we go. You're going to ask and answer with as much detail as possible. So I'll play it out for you how it would look, and then you're going to be able to teach your clients. So you're going to have this first statement. It's usually got your name in it. Jen, stop thinking about this for now. And by the way, this doesn't mean forever. If whatever you're thinking about and you're ruminating and you're perseverating and dwelling on and playing over and over, it eventually needs attention. It's trying to get your attention, which is why it constantly visits, right? But you might not have the privilege to give it attention at that moment, and it can start to rob you and take over your life, right? And so some of you picture yourself at work, you're trying to type up a report, and before you know it, you've lost 10, 15 minutes replaying an awful event that happened 2 weeks ago. Or at work, right? You're trying to type up a report, you're working on it, and you're replaying some meeting that you and another staff full on had an argument. You embarrassed yourself by some of the stuff you said because your lid was flipped, and you're replaying it. You replay it not once, not twice, but 3 times, 4 times. You're trying to write a report, and before you know it, you've lost 5, 10 minutes replaying the fight that you had with other staff at the staff meeting. Can have no benefit from that. You need to bring yourself out into the here and now. So the first thing you do, Jen, stop thinking about this for now. Give yourself a clear direction. You might need to go and attend and address some issues that came up from it, but right now you're trying to get the report done, you're trying to get the work done, whatever it may be, so you need to stop replaying it over and over. Then you're going to ask and answer these questions with as much detail as you can, as much detail. Where am I? Who am I with? What is the task at hand? What are 3 objects in my environment? Ask and answer with as much detail as possible. So here goes. I'm going to model it really quickly just to put it in perspective. So let's say I'm at home. It's a Thursday evening. It's 5:15, and I'm standing at the stove and I'm cooking dinner. And before I know it, I have lost 5 or 10 minutes standing at the stove, but I've gone somewhere else. I'm thinking about an unpleasant past event. I'm thinking about some type of unpleasant past event that I've been through, and before I know it, I got 5, 10 minutes devoted to this unpleasant past event. So I'm going to run myself through the grounding technique very quickly. All right, and so here we go. Jen, stop thinking about this for now. Where am I? Don't walk around when you're doing this grounding technique. You stay firmly stationed where you are. And so, where am I? I'm going to look around. I'm going to remind myself, oh, I'm at 4385 Bellevue Court in Turlock, California. That's right here on the West Coast, right here in the middle of the valley, right here in the United States. Again, that's 4385 Bellevue Court in Turlock, right here on the West Coast in California. As many details as you can. Then go to the next one. Who am I with? Again, don't walk around. I'm going to look over my shoulder. I'm going to kind of think about where am I at? Who's all here? Okay, who am I with? All right, my youngest son Samuel is at the table doing his math homework. Who else is in this home? It's my youngest son Sam. The dog Hannah. Hannah is here. So I've got Hannah here. My oldest son is not home from school yet, but my youngest son is at the table. That's the only people in the house right now, Sam and Hannah. Go down to the next one. What is the task at hand? Again, don't walk around. I'm in front of the stove. The task at hand is I'm cooking that chicken, that broccoli, and this macaroni and cheese. The task at hand is to get that chicken, that broccoli, that macaroni and cheese on that table by 6. So when my oldest son, Joe, comes home, Joe and Sam can eat dinner and I can get everybody off to band practice. Task at hand, that chicken, that broccoli, that macaroni and cheese on that table by 6. Everyone can eat and we can go out the door. The next one, what are 3 objects in my environment? Once again, do not move around while you're doing a grounding technique. 3 objects. 3 objects in my environment. There's my red pot holders right there, gift from my in-laws. What is over here? Here's my spatula that really looks like it needs to be replaced, but I like it, so I'm keeping it. What else is here? Oh, my salt and pepper shakers from TJ Maxx. That's what I got going on here. I don't know how to work them because they're from TJ Maxx and they're probably broken, but I have them right there. All right, so I got my salt and pepper shaker, I got my spatula, and I got my red hand mitts and towels and whatnot. 3 objects in my environment. Okay. Here's why this works. Sounds rather silly and sounds rather contrived. I cannot answer any of those questions, none of those questions I cannot answer if I am stuck in the then and there, if I am stuck in that unpleasant event from the past, whatever it was, that unpleasant event, that unfortunate event, I cannot answer these questions. These questions are in the here and now. It is a gentle way of reaching in your head and bringing you back to the here and now. So you are not at that event, at that situation, at that trauma, at that very unpleasant, upsetting situation. You are back here in the here and now. Does that make sense? So again, it sounds so trivial. You cannot do any work if you're not in the here and now. You can't do any work. You can't live, you can't heal, you can't do any of that. So bring yourself back to the here and now, and then we've got some place to go. So if you know you have a child or a family that you're working with where it's been shared out, they often lose time by being back there. They often lose time by being back there and then in the awful trauma, in the awful abuse, in the awful situations. Teach them this grounding technique. Bring them to the here and now. On average, you may have some clients that have to use it 42 times in 1 week. This is not a one-time fix. 42 times in 1 week. So sometimes people are constantly being pulled between here and now and the then and there. Can't live and heal in the then and there. Pull yourself out to the here and now. So for your teens who do it, they all have phones. Get them to take a snapshot. This needs to be in their phone. Then wherever they're at, if they're in a then and there moment, and they're thinking about the abuse, they're thinking about the hitting, the punching, they're thinking about the boundary crossing, the violations, and they're stuck in that. They pull out their phone like 98% of Americans and look at their screen. But what they're pulling up is the 5 steps, which is stop thinking about it for now. Where are you? What's your task at hand? Who are you with? What are 3 objects in your environment? And they can pretend like they're texting like everyone else, but they've got it right there in their hand. It is a welcome back ticket to the here and now because they don't need to be in the then and there. Does that work? You'd be amazed at how many people can use this. I one time had a 17-year-old female, and she had some horrific sexual assault history, just really awful. She was 17, and all she wanted to do on her 17th birthday was go to the movies with her friends. All her friends say, let's go to the movies. And this gal hated the movies because she'd go to the movies, and you know what happens in the movies? You can't tell who's around you. You can't tell who's in your environment. It's dark. You don't have control over anything. You're in these tight seats, people coming by you, brushing up against you. You have control of absolutely nothing. And so she hated going to the movies, but she's 17. You can hate something and want it at the same time. Sometimes it's called marriage, but that's different. Okay, so, all right. So she wanted to go to the movies. That's all she wanted to do. That's all she wanted to do. So we worked for a long time on the 5-step grounding technique to get her back in the here and now. Because she wanted it, we needed to make a way where she could do it. And so she went to the movies and she pulled her phone out. This should be good for some of you. Don't always turn around and snap at people that are on their phone. All right? Because it's awful, right? It's got this big backlight, you ruin the movie and whatnot. But remember, we don't have all the puzzle pieces. We don't know what's going on with everybody. So she pulls out the phone and she can ground herself. So she comes back into session. She's happy. She said, I went to the movie. I made it to the movie. I was with my 3 friends, and I went to the movie. I made it through the whole movie. I said, oh, that's great. She said, I can't remember anything what the movie was about. Yeah, because she had to do the grounding technique multiple times during the movie. And she said, but I made it. I made it, and no one even knew, and I made it. That's beautiful. right? That's beautiful. She just had to keep anchoring herself back to the here and now. She was not in the then and there, and it allowed her to do what she wanted. An hour and 35 minutes with other 17-year-olds. That's all she wanted. That grounding technique allowed her to just be grounded and do it. Yeah, that's a win-win, right? That's a win-win.
Yeah, except for the people in that movie.
Oh. And again, right, if we could sprinkle a little bit of empathy around, right, a little bit of empathy around, and remember, just resolve yourself. We don't have all the puzzle pieces, right? We don't really know if they're Instagramming. They might actually be grounding themselves out of the most atrocious nightmare. Yes, but it's so true. So due to time, here's where I'm going to leave you. So Kristen Neff, I mentioned this author earlier. So here's what I want you to know. Kristen Neff has done an enormous amount of research. We're not going to go on any more slides. They're all in here. But I want you to know Kristen Neff's work simply says this. When you do self-compassion work, you heal from your trauma symptoms more efficiently, more quickly, and at a higher rate. Here are the 3 steps to Kristen Neff's work. You got to learn how to engage in true mindfulness. And by the way, that's backed by neuroscience. Anytime you teach a kid any mindfulness activity, it actually creates strength in this prefrontal cortex that's at the base of the front cortex right here. Anytime you teach mindfulness, it's like taking this part out to the gym, which is what traumatized people need, because this is the part that goes to the gym all the time. It's the strongest, biggest part of the brain due to their trauma. So we want to take the smart brain out to the gym. And one way that you do it is mindfulness. This part becomes much stronger. That means you get your lid back on quicker and more readily. So that's what we want. So mindfulness. The second component is the whole concept of self-kindness. And the easiest way to assess that with kids is if you have a group of kids right here that you're working with, ask them, hey, if your friend was having a hard time, describe the hard time. What would be some advice that you would say to this kid, your friend? And then go around. And you'll be amazed. You'll hear the most beautiful things from kids. I would tell my friend, hang on, it's okay. Oh, I would tell my friend, go get some help. Oh, I would tell my friend, don't beat yourself up, right? And just let it keep going. As long as that group can keep going and just catalog everything that they're saying about how they would talk to their friend if their friend was struggling. And then ask them, how do you talk to yourself when you're struggling? It's usually the opposite. Traumatized kids trash talk themselves at just appalling rates. They trash talk themselves all the time, but they know how to show kindness because they show it to others. So take that activity and ask themselves, aren't you ready to talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend? How can we have a couple sessions together where you learn to be your friend? You learn to talk to yourself in this kind way that you would talk to your friend. That's about enhancing self-kindness. So that's her second component. And then the very last component, and I give you a number of slides that are in there, but the second component, it's not about comparisons. Everyone gets this mixed up. Connectedness isn't about going, oh, you've had a rough time and I've had a rough time, but your rough time was worse than mine. Connectedness is not about comparisons. Connectedness is about this. You struggle, I struggle, you struggle, I struggle, you struggle, I struggle. I'm not alone in struggle. My struggle may have been different, but I'm not alone in struggle. And here's why you want to do that. You want to remind yourself, I do not have to isolate myself, and I do not have to give myself an emotional death sentence by saying I'm the only one that struggles. When you tell yourself you're the only one that struggles, that is equivalent to an emotional death sentence. Kristen Neff's work says we have to correct that and remind constantly, you've got struggles, I've got struggles, you've got struggles. I am not alone in my struggle. And by the way, as a society, we do that. We do that all the time. We push this evolutionary button that says it's only us. Picture you're running to work one day, you're running to work and you got your coffee, right? And you spill it on you and right before you get into work, into the meeting. And the first thing we say, why me? Well, guess what? Everyone's a slob. I guarantee I point out 10 other people that have spilt something on themselves this morning, or you have a fender bender. Oh my God, why does this always happen to me? Well, first of all, it's California. It happens to apparently 82% of you. Yeah. So you're not alone. Or I get this all the time, especially when I'm doing couples counseling. I'll have a couple in and they're often looking at their marriage and they're questioning, why is this happening to us? The divorce rate is well in the 60s. You are not alone. So it's not about comparing. It is about reminding yourself you're in a human circle. Everyone has struggles. Do not push that button that is still in our brain that says evolutionary struggle, you're on your own. Don't activate it. It will worsen any struggle that you have. The moment you think you're alone, it will make it worse. The moment you think you're the only one that has this struggle, the only one that has this hurt, the only one that's having marital strife, the only one that has a fender bender, the only one that is a slob and spills stuff, the moment you think you're alone, you made the situation worse because you activate your amygdala. You shut down your cortex. You activate your cortisol and adrenaline. Do not push the button that says you're alone. Remind yourself, man, I'm part of a human circle and we're all a little bit of a hot mess, right? But I'm not alone. I'm not alone. So again, it's not about comparisons. It's about I'm not alone. So those three elements are really what Kristen Neff talks about. She says that anytime that you can incorporate this into your work, you're actually going to help the healing from these trauma symptoms and the effects of trauma. Right now, as a veteran, you cannot return home without having some self-compassion work done. It is actually a part of the Department of Justice as well as Veteran Affairs, where when you come home, we're supposed to be activating some self-compassion work because it's one way to help you through healing and recovery. We have to do it with our kids and our families that have been traumatized as well. So anyway, that's just a snapshot of Kristen Neff's work, those three phases. All right, that does it for me. I'll answer questions, but that's it for the PowerPoint. We're going to down. All right. All right. Oh, no, I just meant we're going to close it down like. So questions that you might have. Don't be shy. We're here till 5. No, I'm joking.
Tell Monica I'm going to unmute her.
Monica, we're going to unmute you, my friend. Should we show her? Let's see. Actually, I'm not sure how to do that. Sure. Angelita, do you give me questions?
And Shane, if not, we have a question back here.
Okay, great. Hold on one second.
Sorry. That was my fault. I gave you the go signal. That was all me. All me.
Okay, so we're going to start in the room here. We'll come back to you, Angelita.
When you talked about using the activity of drawing a picture of like a good memory or a good time, what I find with kids who've had trauma or are really depressed is their memory is not that great and their concentration is off. So, and people just asking them in the moment, sometimes they can't think of anything. So like, what do you do when you sit there and you try to give them prompts or think of a time and you try to describe it so many ways, okay, to bring out a good time and they're saying, I don't know.
Good question. And by the way, most children and adolescents, you ask them anything and they're going to go, I don't know, right? You ask them how awesome you are. I don't know, right? So it is very, very normal. So shorten it and ask them just to look at the time frame of the last 24 hours. What was something kind of cool that happened in the last 24 hours? You can even go more short than that. You can ask them, what's the last thing you ate that you really liked in the last 24 hours? Was it the eggs that you had in the morning? Was it the jelly donut you got as a special treat? Move to a food, right? Move to a food. That sometimes is an easy way. Move to a friend and how a friend may have assisted or included them. Assisted, helped them out in some way, or included them. So move to something that's a little bit more tangible within a 24-hour time period. Because then when you do the activity, it'll be easier later on to go a little bit deeper and look for another picture from the past. But just shorten it, last 24 hours, and make it something concrete. Tell me about the last great thing you had. Tell me about your favorite candy and when you last had it. Right? And then tell me about a friend that either assisted you or included you. And it could be that day where someone said, yeah, you know what? Paul asked me to do tetherball with him, right? Well, walk me through. What was that like? And then you just do the same activity. What was it like? What did you smell? What did you feel? Oh, it was a hot day. I could smell the tar from the blacktop. It was great. I could smell myself. I stunk, whatever it may be. You just want them to grab as many senses from that good moment, right? And ask them, how did it feel to be included? That's why I like the included piece, right? How did it feel to be included? So that's what I would do, short and concrete. Yes, yes. Greg. Oh, sorry.
We have 2 online questions, but let's go to our friends here.
I really appreciated that when you spoke about the grounding techniques. What authors that did you mention? Do they teach any of that? How can we learn more about those grounding techniques? I found it very informative because they're very similar to, I know when I was young and when I deal with young ones that have anxiety, when they're going through anxiety attacks, you try to recall their senses when they're starting to panic, and you just start telling them, think of, okay, you point to something, what's blue in your area, or what's, what are you smelling right now? Where are we? So you try to kind of bring them in because they're obviously focused on something that's triggering those panic attacks. So I really appreciate those techniques of grounding.
Okay.
Where can we learn more?
So in regards to grounding technique, the first easy thing to do is type in grounding in the mental health field. Search that way. And I say that because there are a number of authors that have referenced grounding techniques, and there's a lot of grounding techniques out there. However, there is one Facebook page that gives you a new grounding technique every week, and it's called SEL, Social Emotional Learning. And they are pretty heavy in teaching grounding techniques. And so you can, and again, not everyone has Facebook, but if you do, go to that page, like it, and then you'll get a new grounding technique, and you'll also get very basic social emotional learning. They usually will dose out something new every week. They also post poster size images, so you could click on it, print it out, and it could be a poster for your room. Yeah. So I would try there. In the past, Marsha Linehan, when she was working with individuals that engaged in self-harm, which was a heavy part of her work, she did a lot of grounding technique, bringing someone back into the here and now. So some of that can kind of be ferreted out from DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. But that might take a little bit of digging to get into. Instead, the SEL is kind of a quicker route. Yeah, please. And there's lots of different grounding techniques, so you also have to be careful. Like one of the grounding techniques is about recognizing the 5 senses, like being in the moment and figuring out what you're tasting in the moment, what you're smelling in the moment. And so it uses your 5 senses to bring you back to the here and now. I will let you know, you have to use proper judgment about what grounding technique fits for your client. The reason I roll out the 5-step grounding technique is because that's the most generic, basic technique. So for instance, the 5 senses grounding technique, you wouldn't necessarily use that with veterans who have done a lot of work with burn pits or medics in the military. You wouldn't do that because the belief, honestly, is that you can still smell some of the things you smelt during those awful moments. So you stay away from the 5 senses grounding technique, but instead you would go to some of these other grounding techniques. And when you said, Greg, point out something blue, see how many things are blue. That actually falls under the realm. It is similar to a grounding technique, but it's actually a cerebral activity that is a distraction technique. And so it's beautiful. If you are sent into a classroom for a kid that's already escalated, you can usually put them on a mission with you, right? And so you might say, let's walk over to the water fountain, the cold water fountain, the one by the gym. And then while you go there, you can say, hey, you point out as many yellow things you see on the way, and I'll point them out. Whoever gets the most wins. Really, it doesn't really even matter. All you know is that you want them to see, oh, there's a yellow slide, there's a yellow swing. It's a cerebral activity to pull them out of whatever is festering from their trauma memories that is causing them acting out the way they're acting. So cerebral activities for distraction are beautiful. Thank you, Greg.
We have 2 online questions. So we have a question from Monica. Is there a formal curriculum that can be used?
For Kristen Neff's work?
She didn't specify. Monica, can we unmute you? Let me unmute her.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Monica.
Go ahead. The person who had the question, go ahead. Can you hear me?
Get closer to your speaker or microphone.
Don't worry about the spotlight.
Ground yourself.
I just had a quick question. You talked a lot about, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You talked a lot about kind of the strategies that you use when working with young people. Do you have a formal curriculum that could be adapted in other settings, or is it just techniques you've developed and used on your own?
No, so let me make it clear. These techniques come from these authors. I would urge all of you, anytime you roll out a practice or an intervention, link it back to a evidence-based, a well-researched author. So for instance, a curriculum developed by Kristen Neff is an entire activity workbook on how to do the 3 stages of self-compassion. The end goal is that it assists someone in healing and recovery. Second area, which would curriculum, but out of a book, comes from Mindsight from Dan Siegel. And Dan Siegel actually trains people how to look inward and recognize the emotional sea that often leaves them drift or leaves them feeling ducked under as if they're struggling just for breath. So Mindsight by Dan Siegel actually helps you go through, identify these rough seas of emotionality, and then teaches interventions to stop, how to cool that, how to calm that or quell that. And how this relates back to trauma is that, remember, there's high emotionality with trauma brains. And so anything that you can do to help get the cortex back on, you want to go after that type of curriculum, after those types of activities. And then one last one. If you find vetted sites related to mindfulness, like Go Noodle or Go Zen, these mindfulness sites are all about exercising the prefrontal cortex. When a trauma brain does mindfulness activities, you exercise this part of the brain out. That's what you want, because trauma damaged that part of the brain and does not allow it to stay latched with a tight lid. So I would stick with evidence-based practice interventions, things that have been vetted, only so you don't accidentally exacerbate or worsen situations. So again, the authors that I rattled off all have writings in this area. Pull the interventions from their writings. And it doesn't mean they're the only ones. There's lots out there. But I tend to lean on Kristen Neff, Dan Siegel, Rick Hansen, Russ Harris, and very much Brene Brown, which teaches us large components of how to talk to ourselves differently, how to talk to ourselves factually, but kindly. Those two things are not mutually exclusive terms. They should be mutually inclusive together. I should be able to be factual as well as kind to myself. So that's really kind of the heavy research from Brene Brown. And she has an enormous amount of literature and activity books that are created to help you take her research and roll it out. Remember, the majority of her research was really done with individuals that experienced significant trauma, and that were really left with this heavy base of shame and the inability to come out under that from that shame. Yeah, so I hope I answered that question.
And we have one more. Also, I listed the authors earlier in the chat box. Stephanie Guzman wants to know, is it recommended to teach children about ACEs as well as trauma?
So when we talk about the ACEs, remember, be careful with your heavy word use of trauma. Instead, kids know if they've been through something unpleasant. They might not define it as violence. They might not define it as trauma, but they know that something didn't feel so good. They know that something was unpleasant. And so if you are doing the ACEs, if it's a very young child, you typically are not doing the ACEs directly to the child. You're typically getting the ACEs questions answered from the parent. And if you have the luxury and the privilege, you should be getting those answers without the child in the room. Because some parents, when you're doing the ACEs, they'll tell you the story behind the answer. Right? Everyone know the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. And so they go through and they're marking yes or no, and then they start elaborating. That child does not need to be in the room during that elaboration, right? And so you usually want that form filled out, getting that information from the parental unit. Now, if it's an older child and we are talking about the ACEs, you would only do that if you had created a secure safety relationship where you had already made it clear unpleasant experiences can include all kinds of things. Unpleasant experiences can include homelessness. Unpleasant experiences can include emotional abuse. Unpleasant experiences can include the loss of a loved one. So you're letting it know that unpleasant experiences can include a lot of things, right? And so we want to be careful how the ACEs is administered. So you want to use your judgment when rolling that out. But again, there's no benefit to using the word trauma. That hasn't been seen in any studies. Most clients are aware they've had some unpleasant experiences. You can wait until they can operationally define that as trauma later on. You need not put that label right now. And sometimes hearing the word trauma might mean something else, might have a different connotation, and then you've lost them anyway, all right? So hope that answers the question. Yeah, indeed. Indeed. And if I may, just really quick on homelessness, if you are working with families that are homeless, please remember, none of our homeless efforts, none of them will ever have positive outcomes unless you do it trauma informed. And here's why. Out of homeless men, 90% of homeless men have experienced childhood abuse. Out of homeless women, 93% have experienced childhood abuse. You cannot do any homelessness efforts unless you're doing it in a trauma-informed way, because who you're talking to has dormant brain or trauma brain. Absolutely not. So it doesn't matter that you got them going in vocational school, doesn't matter that you got them housing, transitional, permanent, does not matter. What will happen, research shows, and the SHIFT study is an infamous study that's been done over and over and over since 1997, and it shows that if you do not address trauma, you get that person into their permanent housing, you know what comes out to play in 3 months? Their trauma symptoms. Then everything goes out the window. They start not making clear decisions. They start letting people into their house whom they should not let into their house. They start forgetting appointments. They stop showing up to where they need to go. They stop caring for themselves they were. And that's because during the first 3 months when you were involved, you had many contacts. That's how we work with homeless people. We bombard them with contacts in the beginning. That's distraction, distraction, distraction. By the 3rd month of them being in housing, they will decompensate, and you will see them back in the queue, and you will wonder, isn't this a Carlton family that I've already worked with? Why are they homeless again? Because after 3 months, trauma symptoms come out to play, everything decompensates. It's a revolving door. So no homelessness efforts anywhere will ever work unless you do it in a trauma-informed way. So again, 90% of homeless males have childhood abuse. 93% of homeless females have child abuse. And new research that just has come out, March 2019, lets us know 1 out of every 2 homeless individuals has traumatic brain injury that happened after becoming homeless. Can't do any work, all right? No work at all. It's like trying to make lasagna without noodles. You can't do it. So what happened? Yeah. Sorry, just a little kick there, because some people forget to add that homeless piece in there. But remember, you got to add that in. We see you, Monica.
Trauma, or are we unmuted?
You are unmuted, Monica.
Okay, we have a great question from the audience. Go ahead, Allison. Here we go. Get excited. The answer might be a whole other day of training.
I was curious, as you're doing these practices, if the neuroplasticity changes, or the instinct rather to think positive than negative depends on the age of the child, the length of the practice, or like the amount of the trauma.
Yes, yeah.
Right? I don't know. That's a big question.
I'm thinking I heard the question. May I? Okay, I'm thinking I heard your question correctly. So remember that the activities that we do, the brain, by the way, stays, has a lot of neuroplasticity, has a lot of change and room for growth. So the trauma pathways that have been set in your neural replacement activities, again, are anything that you do or say that counters all the seeds that were planted, all the cognitive messages that were planted. So you can't necessarily say this individual was traumatized or abused for 3 months, so therefore I'm going to do X amount of neural replacement activity. Here's why it doesn't have such an easy mathematical equation. Because there are other variables, other variables involved. And the best way to describe it is a seat on the bus. So picture a bus, and we're all on the bus together. We all travel on the bus together, right? And I got seat 3. Courtney, you got seat 17. Monica, you got seat 22. Paul, you got seat 8. So we're all in a different bus together. Then that bus that we're all riding on, we all have a different seat. All of a sudden, we have an accident. And it's a pretty atrocious accident. Lots of car screeching, tires screeching, broken glass. You can see some fire, you can smell some smoke. So it was a pretty rough bus accident. But we would all interpret it differently because we have different seats. So the variables that line up to create your seat are all kinds of things. Your IQ, your EQ, so your emotional intelligence, your intellect, your natural level of resiliency that you already have, the supportive networks that you have, your personality, your sense of humor, your experiences of loving things already in the past, your academic prowessness. All of these things affect your seat on the bus. So if we all got off the bus and you were interviewed about the accident, you would have a different take on it. And so therefore, you might heal with a couple of neural replacement activities, right? You get off the bus and you recall it totally different. Maybe you were, Courtney, you were all the way in the back of the bus and you didn't even see the oncoming car. You never saw the headlights. You never heard the screeching tires. But what you did feel is the entire back of the bus rumble and tumble with no explanation, right? People next to you flopping and flailing all over the place. And so you have that experience. All of the variables that make up you, your personality, your character traits, your IQ, your EQ, your past experiences, your loving place that you have to land now, or your non-loving place that you have to land now. All of those things will make up how that trauma affects. And so the neural replacement activity could be very short with you, or could need to be very long with you. So you see how all of those variables that make up who we are, that affects how trauma damages us, which is why when you are working with a sibling set, you have to remind yourself they all occupied a different seat. It does not even matter if you're working with triplets, all the same age. They may be different in personality. If you know triplets, they are. Different in EQ status, different in IQ status. They, living life out there, have developed different relationships. Right? I remember working with a sibling set, and I couldn't figure out why this one kid had such a high sense of resiliency. He had been through the same type of trauma as everyone else. And so we had eventually delved into this question called the special person question, where you're just really trying to identify like who are the people in your life that, you know, got your back or somehow feed you, right? And I kid you not, this 9-year-old looks right up at me. He's all, the postman. And I was like, oh, I want to know your mailman route. What is this about, right? And no, it was the fact that he was playing outside in the yard one day when the mailman came, and they just struck up a conversation about something that they had in similarity. It was baseball season, so they're just talking about that. So what happened is that every day he had a visitor that he liked. Right? So during a 3-month summer time period, he got to see someone every day that had a mutual like, that they could chat for a minute. Hey, what do you think about this player? What do you think about that? So it was just this beautiful, nurturing relationship. And their trauma experiences had happened after the summertime. But he had this beautiful, nurturing relationship with an adult male who did not cross boundaries, did not violate, and was just beautiful to him. That allowed him to have a faster sense of recovery because he was able to say, my uncle who harmed me in this way is one man. The man who delivers my mail is this man. That mailman was a neural replacement activity that he had the luxury of visiting every day, right? So you see there's all these variables, right? All these variables. So that's why there's not necessarily this equation, but there is a way to test to figure out, is healing work landing, and is it taking well? And here's how it is. When an individual can tell you their history, give you a history continuum, right? Like on a history timeline, and they can start describing who they are now, what's going on now, but also let you know, when I was 7, wasn't so nice. And then they go back to the here and now. What that means is they have incorporated their trauma into their historical timeline. Their trauma is not the story, it's part of the story. So immediately when you have someone that can come back in the moment and tell you about today and what they're doing and how they're doing their belly breaths and how they're having fun at tetherball and how they don't like pizza, you know, and they can kind of get back to here, but when they give you a timeline, they can say, yeah, from ages 7 to 8, it wasn't so great for me, Jen. It was kind of rough. That's when the trauma has been integrated back into their timeline. It's become part of the story. It is not the story. That's like a litmus test, how you can tell if you're moving along quite well with healing. Did that answer the question? I don't even remember the question.
Yes, we think that. I'm sorry, you can hear me. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Yes, yes. We're good? Any other questions? I live here right there in that chair, so I'm here all day if you want. No, I don't have to live here. All right. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. We got one back here. I apologize. I didn't see your hand. That's a story of my life. Yeah. I'm delayed.
So I'm curious whether it's grounding techniques or whether it's just different strategies to help people whose lid is off. Trauma is really fresh in crisis. We work with victims of crime. How to support them in systems that don't allow them the space. So being interviewed by law enforcement, having to go to court, having to voice things, having to come up with timelines. Is there any kind of nuggets to help in those moments?
Goodness. I take a deep breath with that one, because we do have system harm, right? We can identify some systems that have been able to, have a one-stop shop where, the time that they're having the care interview happen, they've got all the cameras set up, behind one-way mirrors so that child doesn't have to keep telling their story over and over. But then we have other systems that doesn't work like that. The child really had to tell their story and was really forced in to find these details that maybe they weren't able to know or to identify at that time. So for system work, I like to teach the people who work there. You are pushing for a detail that you need for a legal case, and I get it. But you're looking for a needle in the haystack because that might not be one of the puzzle pieces they got, right? And so if I have a child that's going in that is cognitively able to understand that, I'm going to just clarify, hey, when you go in to answer questions, when you don't know the answer, there's nothing wrong with you. That's quite normal. It's quite factual. What is normal also is you might have someone keep pressuring you and pushing for it. And it's not because they're mad at you. It's because they really want the puzzle piece that you don't have. They really want the puzzle piece that you don't have. And so what I allow them to do is have a little psychological distance, right? Between the pushing of this person asking questions so that I don't blame myself. I must be stupid and I can't remember, right? Instead, I let them know, no, the facts are you might not have the puzzle piece, right? That night was really awful. That night was really awful and you might only have a couple of the puzzle pieces. So when you don't know the answer, you're okay. That person might push for it and that's okay too. That's their job. But it's not anything for you to take personal. When you come out, let's go ahead and share out how we're angry, because it's hard when people ask for an answer that you don't have. It's hard for people to go, where's the puzzle piece? I don't have that puzzle piece, man, right? And when they're an adult, you're gonna have an adult say, I don't even know if I wanted that puzzle piece. There are certain things I did not want to remember about that event. Yeah. Which is why we don't need to be digging up puzzle pieces, right? You let the client tell you, I want to dig up as many puzzle pieces as I can. And then you go in that route. You go in that direction, right? All right. Does that help? Oh, yeah. All right, I think we're done. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you have the clicker? All right. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break up into groups to kind of digest a little bit of what we heard and talk about just all of this information that we've just taken in. And so we have 3 questions, and we're going to do this cafe style. So Monica, at your site, you have the handouts that you can put out, and you also have this on the screen. So we'll go ahead and we're going to come back at, do you have the agenda, the time? So we'll let you go through the questions at your site, at each site, and report back. And then we'll check in with you around probably 2:15, 2:25 and see, hear some common themes. So at this site, if I could have these 2 tables joined together, so each of the tables join as one table. So this will be one group, these 2 tables will be one group, these 2 tables will be another group, and over there we'll have one group. And the questions are going to be, so first, once you get into your groups, I'll go over the directions. So if I could have everyone at these front tables, go to this back table, go to a back table. So you guys will come here, you guys will come here, and you guys will go here. Can you help with paper? Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to give you about 5 minutes. We're going to give you about 5 minutes to answer the first question. What surprised you? You can jot down anything that you'd like on this easel paper that we'll give you with markers. I know. No. No.
Stockton, so hopefully you're doing the same thing in your rooms. And wrapping up in about 10 minutes. So go ahead and do your wrap-ups from your discussions. Thank you.
Okay.
Before we go to our 2 remote sites, I want to read what Angie Dominguez said, but I'll wait for people to give them their chance.
Okay. All right. So let's, hello, Fresno and Merced. We're coming back. We just wrapped up our conversation here, so we're anxious to hear a little bit from you all about a few themes that came up for you in response to some of the questions. So how about if we start with Angelita in Fresno?
Their responses, themes.
Or check off if you.
Okay, we have one online response that I'd like to read.
So hang on a second, folks. We have one online participant who wants to share a thought. Here we go.
She says, I would like to have, this is Angie Dominguez, or no, I think that's right, Dominguez. I would like to have more conversations in our classrooms, but the dynamic between our thinking caps and volcanoes to really give children visuals and the ability to concentrate. And then she says, I lost it. Hold on just a second. Where'd it go? Hold on. I don't know how that happens. She says, With that said, I think success would be seeing that conceptualization in practice through use of intervention techniques and witnessing children in our classes implementing these techniques.
Nice. So knowing your success when you see it happening in the classroom and the kids are doing it. Awesome.
All right, so I'm going to unmute Angelita.
Okay.
Angelita's Angelita. We're unmuted, Angelita.
Angelita, so share with us a little bit of what the highlights were from your group for the questions. Start with 1, go to 2, and then 3.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Hello? Yes.
We hear
Okay. Some of the things we wrote on question was what surprised you? And so I think most of what we've seen was a lot of activities, very easy activities that we could do with our clients in order to better support them. Another thing that surprised us was regarding, sorry, I can't see that far.
That's okay. You can move around.
Okay, and so number 2, something that our agency will be doing within a week would be changing vocabulary in our words, how we're using, instead of using trauma experience, so putting it in their words, maybe how she said using unpleasant past experience.
That's great.
Within a month, we would be doing coffee hours, like parenting classes regarding the different topics of like the feeling chart, the 5-step grounding technique, doing it more like a group setting first with our parents. Also, a lot of this information that we learn, a lot of practices, we'll be talking about it during our team meetings and revisiting this presentation.
Excellent. Awesome.
For number 3, we put what does success look like with the clients? Would be they're resilient, they're breaking the cycle, they're changing behavior, they're accepting services, moving forward with their lives. One of the things that we said that success would look like with us is that we as providers or family advocates would be more self-aware personally regarding trauma. Another thing is being present in the moment versus what if or being in reality with things that are happening. That's it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Yes, clap. Yay. Thank you. Good job. Okay, Monica.
All right, so what surprised us in Merced were the statistics overall, particularly the 6 out of 10 children have experienced trauma, the homeless statistics, the number of adults who are homeless who had experienced trauma as a child. Anger is a secondary emotion, the overall mind-body connection, in particular the bodily sensation memory, and how what we learned today is really applicable to any field of work. We couldn't think of one field of work that this was not important information to have. And what are we going to try? We considered maybe purchasing some of the books that were mentioned today and doing book studies, using the intent versus interpretation photos with families and anybody else that we're working with, talking about the brain with families and really using the hand motions and in terms that are understandable. And really all of us taking back to understand that trauma impacts the people that we work with in any capacity that we're working with them in, and how can we use that and see the families that we're working with through a different lens, and helping parents recognize what flips their own lid prior to the lid flipping. And then what does success look like? Parents are practicing techniques and verbalize what they feel, and also verbalizing and helping to label children's feelings as they're occurring when the children cannot find the words themselves. We'd like to see if success would look like reduced homelessness, decreased CPS reports, increased awareness overall on this topic, having a shared definition and using everybody using evidence-based practices, shared tools, shared interventions, and having a cross-sector workforce who's prepared to meet the needs of our community.
Wow. You guys didn't talk about much, did you?
No. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, Monica. Monica, will you later, like, before you leave, take a picture
Yep.
of your papers? Sorry.
Yes, I understand this is all evaluation here. Yeah. Okay.
I think we got Angelita's, right? Yes. Jen? Okay. And then I'm going to ask Jen to report out a little bit so you all can hear what we talked about. Definitely some similar things.
So for number one, we talked about the perspective of the child that surprised us, the flooding of the 3 love drugs, the different ways that the memories visit. We appreciated that the information was digestible, what Jen presented, moving from labeling. Also, we were surprised to learn that we don't have to focus on the why and the process, and really we don't have to dig for every detail. So understanding that there are missing puzzle pieces, and that's okay. The impact of the trauma label, hearing Jen talk about unappreciated behaviors and the neural replacement activities, understanding that the cortex goes offline and the hand flip, and understanding that feelings come and go, and also the homelessness and the trauma, and understanding why it's important to be trauma informed when working with that population, and the misinterpretation of events, and just really normalizing all of that. For number 2, what we'll try is grounding techniques. We'll use, a lot of us are going to use the visual of the Berenstain Bears and the trauma view, the visual of the monster and what it looks like when we're approaching to work with our participants. Avoid using the word trauma, normalizing it, letting children know that they aren't alone, using the name it and the feelings, and also the comic book technique, and educating the support system. How we'll know what success will look like, forward progress, even if it's a small baby step, just as long as we're moving in the right direction. System change, we'll have educated providers. We'll have participants that will know when they have their thinking caps on, and we'll also have them when they will know they're successful or we're successful when they can focus on the here and now, and when they can use the hand model, and also seeing children use techniques in the classroom. And that was it for us.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
To advance slides.
Yeah, back to the slides.
I was trying to show them everybody on the other.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Shane.
They know there's no people there.
There you go.
All right. Just a reminder for everyone that we will be mailing out Jen's presentation. So I believe that do we just want to make sure that we have everyone's email address? We should, if you registered through Strategies, we have that. If you walked in today, you should have filled out a paper so we can get your name and your email address. So we'll make sure and get that information to you. So watch for that, because we will send that out. We're also going to send a link to Jen's initial presentation that she did in May, where she went into a little more detail about toxic stress. So that would be something that would be interesting for you to catch, and if you have time to go back and review that. And then what we really want to do is hear from you about what you tried and what worked. We're really curious about what we're going to do moving forward in different areas of the valley, and really curious about the impact of that. So our next learning community is actually going to be on February 26th. With the location is TBA, so we don't know that yet. But it will be February 26th, and we are really going to focus on building parental resiliency by creating greater parent engagement. We all are working with parents. We have different roles, but I think one thing that we find and we know to be true is that if you can get really actively engaged, motivated, passionate parents in the work that you do, it can really change the course of the work you do. And so we're hoping to explore, and we're gonna have a panel and invite some folks who have some really thriving parent engagement programs and spend some time with them. So that will be on February 26th. And so
for those of you, sorry.
Go ahead, Shane.
Interrupt you. For those of you in the room, and this doesn't help Fresno or Merced necessarily, we have a training the next day in Modesto on our case management training, our full day case management training that's open for registration in case anybody's interested in that.
All right, yeah. So come on down for that if you can. Are you doing the training, Shane?
Yes.
Yes. All right. The lovely Shane will be doing the training. Absolutely, yes. Go to strategies.ca.org. Oh, strategiesca.org. Sorry about that. And register. And as I said too, you can participate in other learning communities online. So if you, like we have several throughout the state, so if there are others that are of interest to you, you can be an online participant and sit in. And obviously we love it when people come in person. So next opportunity would be the 26th. So please, again, fill out your evaluation, just leave it on the table. And with that, we're done. I want to thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Happy holidays, yes.